Hello there, my friend, and welcome back. Tonight, I invite you to settle in, breathe slowly, and let your mind drift. We are about to step into a land where time moves differently, a land shaped by wind, by sand, by sun, and by the quiet rhythm of the Nile. A land where myths lived as real as people, and where the gods seemed close enough to touch. A land the world has whispered about for thousands of years. Ancient Egypt, the kingdom of time, the cradle of stone, and the home of gods who once breathed among mortals. So let the noise of the day fade away now. Let the weight on your shoulders loosen, just a little, and let the warm desert air guide you gently into the story. You are safe here, drifting beside me, as we begin a journey across more than 3 millennia of human memory. Tonight, we travel not in haste, but in stillness. Not through textbooks, but through imagination, through stories carved into temples, whispered in tombs, and carried by the eternal wind over the Sahara. If you listen closely, you might hear it, the soft rush of desert sand moving beneath the moonlight, the soothing, endless flow of the Nile as it winds through the ancient world, and the quiet echo of footsteps that once belonged to pharaohs, queens, priests, and ordinary people who lived in one of history's most extraordinary civilizations. So, close your eyes if you'd like, and picture the scene. Before you stretches a vast golden horizon, warm and shimmering under the fading light of dusk. The desert breathes like a living creature, exhaling heat into the sky. Far to the east, the Nile glimmers like a ribbon of silver. Its waters carry life across the land, feeding crops, feeding cities, feeding stories that will outlast empires. This is Egypt, shaped by two halves of the same world, the quiet land of the living to the east, and the silent land of the dead to the west. For the ancient Egyptians believed that every sunrise was a rebirth, and every sunset was a gentle return to the afterlife. And across these cycles of day and night, across thousands of years, a civilization grew. A civilization of colossal monuments, brilliant minds, fierce rulers, and deep, unwavering spirituality. But Egypt did not appear in an instant. Its story began long before pyramids pierced the sky, long before kings claimed divine blood, long before scribes dipped their brushes into ink. It began in a world of small settlements along the river, where early tribes learned to read the language of the Nile, where the rising and falling of the flood became a heartbeat, where people looked to the heavens and saw not just stars but gods. And from these beginnings came what we now call the pre-dynastic period, the first chapter in Egypt's long and winding story. But that is only our starting point tonight, because the history we are about to explore spans more than 3,000 years. 3,000 years of triumph, collapse, rebirth, and transformation. 3,000 years of pharaohs who rose like suns and fell like shadows. 3,000 years of temples carved into cliffs, cities built from mud brick, and monuments aligned with the cosmos. 3,000 years of myths, stories of creation, death, resurrection, and the eternal battle between order and chaos. And though centuries have passed and empires have faded, ancient Egypt remains alive in every grain of sand, every carved hieroglyph, every silent tomb that watches the desert from beneath the earth. So tonight, we will walk through its story slowly, softly, like travelers moving under moonlight. We will begin with the dawn of the pre-dynastic age, where the first rulers shaped small kingdoms along the Nile. Then we will drift into the Old Kingdom, the age of the Great Pyramids, when pharaohs built mountains of stone to touch eternity. We will pass into the Middle Kingdom, a time of reunification, literature, and quiet brilliance. We will rise into the New Kingdom, Egypt's golden era, the age of Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and Ramses the Great. We will witness the empire's decline, shaken by droughts, invasions, and political storms. And finally, We will watch Egypt transform under Greek and Roman rule, led by figures like Alexander the Great, the House of Ptolemy, and the unforgettable Queen Cleopatra. All of these eras, all of these lives, connect like beads on a golden necklace, each one shining with its own story, its own mystery, its own beauty. And tonight, we follow that necklace from one end to the other, tracing the full arc of Egypt's rise and fall, not as historians, not as scholars, but as listeners, as wanderers, as dreamers. So let the story unfold at its own pace. Let each moment settle gently like dust over ancient stone. Let each scene drift softly into the next. And if your mind begins to drift too, that's perfectly fine. This journey is meant to soothe you, to calm your thoughts, to help you rest while the sands of history shift around you. Imagine the desert at night. The stars above are sharp and bright, the same stars priests once used to align pyramids with the heavens. The air is cool and still, wrapping around you like a soft blanket. In the distance, you can almost see the faint outline of a temple, columns rising from the earth like silent guardians, walls covered in stories, stories of gods who command the sky, stories of kings who cross the afterlife, stories of love, vengeance, sacrifice, and renewal. You can almost hear the scratch of a scribe's reed pen, the murmur of priests performing ancient rites, the steady beat of a drum echoing through a festival in honor of Ra, Hathor, or Osiris. Every sound is distant, softened by time. Every memory floats like smoke under the moonlight. And as we stand together at the edge of Egypt's long chronology, the story begins to open like a doorway carved into stone. Behind that doorway lies a world older than empires, older than writing, older than most civilizations humanity has ever known. A world that believed every moment had meaning. A world that saw order in stars, purpose in wind, and eternity in death. And so, my friend, as the night deepens around us, we step forward into the first chapter, into the beginning of ancient Egypt, a beginning shaped by river, by sand, and by the dreams of a people who wanted to speak with the gods. And tonight, we will follow their footsteps, slowly, gently, all the way through time. In the beginning, before time carried its first breath, there was only darkness, a darkness so vast, so endless, that even silence had not yet been born. This darkness had a name, none. None was not emptiness, but an ocean of infinite potential, swirling quietly beneath eternity. A formless, boundless sea, stretching in every direction without edge or shore. There was no sky, no earth, no gods, no stars, only the patient, eternal water waiting for the first spark of creation. And then, slowly, gently, something began to rise from the depths. A single mound of earth pushed upward through the dark waters, like a breath breaking the surface for the first time. The ancient Egyptians called it the primordial mound, the first place where existence touched the void. On this mound, under the weight of silence that had lasted forever, a lotus flower began to form. Its petals were closed tightly, holding light that did not yet know itself. Day after day, or perhaps centuries, or perhaps moments, for time did not yet exist, the lotus floated atop the mound, waiting, until one day, with unimaginable gentleness, the petals began to unfold. And from the heart of the flower, a bright, warm light spilled into the darkness. That light had a name, Ra. Ra, the first god. Ra, the first sunrise the universe would ever see. His light frightened away the shadows that had ruled eternity, and the world began to stir awake. The Egyptians believed that every morning, when the sun rose, it was this moment repeating itself, the first dawn, reborn again and again. Ra stood upon the mound, alone yet powerful, his light shaping the world around him. But he knew creation could not rest on one being, so he willed into existence his first children, Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. Air and moisture, invisible but essential, spread outward from Ra like twin currents of life. Shu lifted the world with his breath. Tefnut softened it with gentle dew, giving form to the space in which life would someday thrive. Together, the three formed the first family of the cosmos, and with their presence, the world had motion, texture, and rhythm. Shu and Tefnut wandered far into the waters of Nun, exploring the early cosmos as if they were children wandering through a vast, empty home. Ra, watching from the mound, became worried when they did not return. He feared he had lost them to the darkness, so he sent his eye, a radiant, divine extension of himself, to find his children. When Shu and Tefnut returned safely, Ra's joy was so immense that tears fell from his eyes onto the earth. And from those tears, humanity was born. Human beings, created from divine emotion, not from power or command, but from love. With air and moisture reunited at the center of creation, the next stage of the universe unfolded. Shu and Tefnut soon had two children of their own, Geb and Nut. Geb, the god of the earth, lay below as solid ground stretching across existence. Nut, the goddess of the sky, arched above him like a shimmering dome of stars yet unborn. But they were inseparable and deeply in love, embracing tightly in the earliest days of creation. Ra, however, decreed that sky and earth must be separated so life could flourish between them. So Shu, god of air, placed himself between the two lovers. He lifted Nut high above, her body becoming the firmament, the endless sky. Geb lay beneath her as the land, mountains, valleys, and fertile soil yet to come. Between them stretched the world we know, the realm of humans, animals, and growing life. From Nut, the Sky Mother, came the next generation, a group of deities who would define the moral, emotional, and spiritual heart of ancient Egypt. Osiris, the god of order, fertility, and civilization. Isis, the goddess of magic, compassion, and motherhood. Seth, the god of storms, violence, and the unpredictable edge of nature. Nephthys, the guardian of the night and protector of the dead. These four siblings would shape the destiny of both mortals and gods, weaving together the story that sits at the center of Egyptian belief. And it is from them, especially Osiris and Isis, that the core of Egyptian religion emerged. Their story is not simply a myth, but a living pulse that defined how Egyptians understood life, death, justice, and rebirth. So let us slow down here and gently step into their tale. The tale begins in a world still young, still warm with the light of creation. Osiris, firstborn son of Geb and Nut, was loved by both gods and mortals. He carried within him the calm wisdom of the earth and the steady balance of the sky. When he took the throne as ruler of Egypt, the land blossomed under his gentle guidance. Osiris taught humans how to farm the fertile soil along the Nile. He taught them how to plant grain, how to harvest, how to store food for the leaner seasons. He showed them how to build homes, how to settle disputes fairly, how to live in harmony with the cycles of nature. With Osiris guiding them, humans transformed from wandering tribes to flourishing communities. The Nile's rhythm became the heartbeat of civilization. Though Osiris was a god, he ruled as if he were close to the people. He listened, he nurtured, he brought order out of chaos, stability out of uncertainty. Standing beside him was Isis, his beloved wife and equal in every way. Isis was the most skilled wielder of magic among the gods. Her knowledge was deep, her heart patient, her love unwavering. Together, Osiris and Isis created a kingdom of peace, a kingdom where humans felt the presence of the divine not as fear but as comfort. But light never exists without shadow, and in this tale, the shadow was Seth. Seth, the brother of Osiris, watched from the desert, the realm of fire, wind, and unpredictable storms. He envied Osiris' place on the throne. He resented the love mortals had for their gentle king. Where Osiris brought growth, Seth ruled over barren places. Where Osiris brought calm, Seth embodied the wild and the violent. His jealousy grew as Egypt prospered. And slowly, a plan began to form in his mind, a plan shaped by bitterness, cunning, and ambition. The plan took shape on a night of celebration. Seth invited the gods to a grand feast. Music drifted through the air, cups overflowed with wine, and laughter filled the hall. In the center of the room, Seth displayed a magnificent chest, beautifully carved and perfectly polished. He announced that he would give this chest as a gift to anyone who could fit inside it perfectly. One by one, the gods tried, but the chest was always too large or too small. Finally, Osiris, cheerful and unsuspecting, stepped forward. He lowered himself into the chest, stretching out his limbs, and the moment his body touched the bottom, it was clear it fit him perfectly. Before Osiris could rise, Seth slammed the lid shut. He sealed it tightly with molten lead. Then, with the help of his followers, he carried the chest to the Nile and cast it into the river. The waters swallowed it whole. The celebration turned into horror, though none reacted in time. Osiris drifted away, trapped within the chest, carried by the Nile's current toward lands unknown. When Isis learned what had happened, her heart broke with a grief that shook even the heavens. But grief did not stop her. She began a long and lonely journey to find her husband. She searched across the marshes, through foreign lands, among reeds and riverbanks. The wind carried her sorrow. The stars guided her steps. At last, she found the chest, lodged within the roots of a great tree. The tree had grown tall and strong around it, as if embracing the fallen god. With tender hands, Isis retrieved her husband's body and brought him back to Egypt. She hid him carefully, hoping to restore him with her magic. But Seth discovered her intent. In fury, he found the body, tore it into pieces, and scattered them across the land. The earth mourned, the sky wept, yet Isis did not give up. With devotion that surpassed even the gods, she traveled the length of Egypt, gathering each piece of Osiris' body. She found them among fields, within the desert, along the Nile, and in the heart of quiet villages. With the help of Nephthys and Anubis, the god of mummification, she reassembled Osiris, the first mummy in history. Her magic wrapped him with care. Her love gave him breath again, if only for a moment. And in that moment, Isis conceived a child, Horus. Osiris, unable to remain in the world of the living, descended peacefully into the realm of the dead. There he became the ruler of the afterlife, guiding souls upon their eternal journey. Isis, now a mother and a widow, hid her newborn son among the wetlands of the Nile. She raised Horus in secrecy, guarding him from Seth's wrath. Horus grew under her gentle guidance, patient, wise, and strong. And when he came of age, he sought justice for his father. The battles that followed were long and filled with struggle, but not cruelty. For this was a story not of revenge, but of restoring balance. In the end, Horus defeated Seth, and the gods declared Horus the rightful king of Egypt. The throne of Egypt became the throne of Horus, and every pharaoh who ruled afterward was believed to carry his spirit. This myth, the birth of the world, the rise of the gods, the tragedy of Osiris, and the triumph of Horus, became the beating heart of Egyptian belief. It taught them that order must always rise against chaos, that love is stronger than loss, that death is not the end, but a doorway, and that the world, like the sun, is reborn again and again. For the Egyptians, these were not merely stories. They were truths carved into stone, painted on temple walls, and whispered beside the Nile under starlit nights. Truths that shaped how they lived, how they ruled, how they mourned, and how they dreamed. And now, as we gently close this chapter of creation and divine memory, we stand ready to walk forward into the next chapter of our journey, the moment when myth fades into history and the first kingdoms arise along the banks of the Nile. When the ancient world was still young, and the deserts of North Africa had not yet settled into their eternal quiet, people drifted along the banks of a river that would shape their destiny. This river was the Nile, a long winding ribbon of life cutting through the deep gold of the Sahara. Every year, like a heartbeat, the Nile rose and spilled its waters across the land. And when the waters pulled back, they left behind rich, dark soil. The Egyptians called it Kemet, the Black Land, a land where grain grew easily, where animals grazed, and where life could flourish even under a burning sun. For early humans wandering across Africa, nothing was more precious than fertile earth and fresh water. So they settled beside the Nile, following its rhythm, learning its moods, and building their lives close to its banks. At first, their villages were small clusters of mud huts, simple tools, woven mats, and clay pots shaped by hand. But each season brought more knowledge, more skill, more courage, and slowly, the scattered groups along the river began to grow into communities. Two distinct regions formed: Upper Egypt in the south, where the river cut through narrow valleys, and Lower Egypt in the north, where the Nile fanned out into a wide delta before meeting the Mediterranean Sea. These two regions were like two siblings with different personalities. Upper Egypt was long and lean, bordered by cliffs and deserts that protected its people. Lower Egypt was wide and open, with marshes, lakes, and fertile fields stretching toward the sea. Each region had its own customs, its own gods, its own leadership. Small towns grew into city-states early, independent kingdoms governed by local chiefs. They built shrines to their gods, traded with neighboring settlements, fished the river, farmed the floodplains, and buried their dead with care and reverence. Their world was small but deeply connected to the land around them. They lived by the rhythm of the Nile: flood, planting, harvest. They watched the stars, mapped the seasons, and began to understand the delicate balance between life and death, water and desert, order and chaos. As these early kingdoms grew, they began to compete with one another. Some allied, some fought, some faded into history. But slowly, two major powers emerged: the kingdom of Upper Egypt and the kingdom of Lower Egypt. Each ruled by its own king, each carrying its own symbols of power. Upper Egypt wore a tall white crown, Lower Egypt wore a wide red crown. And for centuries, the two lands existed side by side, separate but aware of one another, like two halves waiting to be joined. Stories from this period blur the line between history and myth. They speak of warrior kings, wise priests, and divine guidance. They speak of battles fought along the riverbanks, alliances forged under the moonlight, and rulers whose names have been lost to time. But among these ancient leaders, one name rose above all others, a name whispered, in legend, carved in stone, and remembered as the first great unifier of Egypt. His name was Narmer. Some call him Menes, some call him the Falcon King, but most simply call him the one who brought the two lands together. Narmer's story feels almost like a dream, half truth, half myth, entirely unforgettable. He came from Upper Egypt, where the cliffs rose high and the Nile flowed straight and strong. He was said to be powerful, wise, and favored by the gods. His emblem was the falcon, a symbol of Horus, the sky god, the protector of kings, and whether by diplomacy, strength, or destiny, Narmer gathered the fractured kingdoms beneath his rule. He marched northward, unifying village after village, city after city, until he reached the fertile marshes of Lower Egypt. There, history tells us, he completed what no one before him had fully achieved. He united the two lands into one kingdom. The moment was so monumental that Egyptians later viewed it as the dawn of their civilization. They believed that when Narmer united the two lands, chaos was pushed back and order, the divine principle of Ma'at, settled over the world. The famous Narmer palette, carved in dark stone, shows him wearing both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt. Two crowns, two lands, one king. The Egyptians called this Sematai, the unification, a binding of the north and south, sealed by divine will. With unity came the birth of something new, the very first dynasty, the beginning of recorded Egyptian history, and the foundation of what would become one of the longest-lasting civilizations the world has ever known. And at the center of this new world stood the role of Pharaoh. To the Egyptians, the Pharaoh was not just a king, he was the living embodiment of Horus, the falcon god of the sky, a divine presence walking the earth, bridging the world of gods and the world of humans. The Pharaoh ruled not just by strength, but by sacred duty. He was responsible for keeping Ma'at, the cosmic order, in perfect balance. Without the Pharaoh, the Egyptians believed the world would slip back into chaos. The Nile might stop flooding, the sun might fail to rise, the land might fall into darkness. So each pharaoh carried a burden larger than power, the burden of harmony. The pharaoh's responsibilities touched every part of life. He was the supreme military commander, expected to defend Egypt from invaders and expand its borders when necessary. He was the high priest of every temple, ensuring the gods were honored through rituals, offerings, and festivals. He was the judge whose word resolved disputes, shaped laws, and defined justice. He was the administrator who oversaw irrigation, taxation, grain storage, and the great building projects that would one day carve monuments into eternity. And to the people, he was something more, a symbol of unity, a source of stability, and the human face of the divine. The pharaoh's body was believed to contain a spark of godhood. His bloodline carried the essence of heaven. His coronation was not just a political ceremony, but a sacred transformation, a moment in which he became Horus on earth. When he died, he became Osiris, the ruler of the afterlife, guiding the souls of the departed. Thus, each pharaoh lived two lives, one in the living world as Horus, and one in the world beyond as Osiris. This cycle mirrored the rising and setting of the sun. Just as Ra traveled across the sky each day and through the underworld each night, so too did the pharaoh travel between the worlds. This connection made the pharaoh more than a ruler, he was a bridge between heaven and earth, between life and death, between the divine and the mortal. When Narmer unified the two lands, he created a structure that would last for more than 3,000 years. He chose a place to build his capital, a city located where Upper and Lower Egypt met, a place that symbolized unity. He named it Memphis. Memphis became the heart of the kingdom, the seat of government, and the home of powerful priests and viziers. From Memphis, the pharaohs ruled the length of the Nile, from its delta to its far southern cataracts. They oversaw the construction of canals, temples, fortresses, and farms. They shaped the landscape itself, turning the Nile Valley into a powerful, organized, and prosperous kingdom. The unification also sparked a cultural explosion. Artists carved new symbols of kingship into stone. Scribes developed early forms of writing hieroglyphs to record offerings, ceremonies, and royal achievements. Craftsmen created jewelry, pottery, tools, and sacred objects with growing sophistication. Egypt was not just unified, it was awakening. The idea of divine kingship shaped everything. It shaped how people lived, how they prayed, how they viewed the land beneath their feet. For the Egyptians believed that their land was not random, it was given shape by the gods. The sky was Nut, stretched above. The earth was Geb, lying below. The Nile was the gift of the gods, a life-giving vein running through the body of the world. To harm Egypt, to ignore one's duties, or to disrupt Maat was to disrespect the gods themselves. And so the role of Pharaoh became sacred beyond human measure. He was not worshipped as Ra or Osiris, but he was honored as their chosen vessel. When he appeared in public, people bowed. When he gave orders, scribes rushed to record them. When he died, the entire kingdom mourned as if a star had fallen from the sky. Early pharaohs were buried in mastabas, tall rectangular tombs built above ground. These early tombs were the first steps toward what would later become pyramids. But at the dawn of Egypt's dynastic period, even these simple structures held deep meaning. They were not just graves. They were stairways to eternity. Narmer's successors continued to strengthen the kingdom, expanding trade networks, improving agriculture, and building the administrative systems that held Egypt together. They standardized laws, coordinated labor across vast distances, and ensured that the Nile's floods were used to their fullest potential. Each year, Nile floods were measured and recorded. Priests interpreted the signs, predicting harvest levels, taxation needs, and labor requirements. The kingdom became organized, disciplined, and remarkably stable. This stability allowed Egypt to flourish, to grow confident, to grow bold, and within a few generations, the unified kingdom would step onto the world stage in a way that would change human history forever. For soon, the pharaohs would begin building monuments so grand, so enduring, so impossibly vast, that they would redefine what civilization could achieve. But all of this, the pyramids, the temples, the golden ages, began with the early people who settled along the Nile, with the dark, fertile soil that fed them, with the first kings who guided their small villages, with the vision of Narmer, who joined two lands and created one nation, and with the sacred belief that the pharaoh was not just a ruler, but a living bridge to the divine, a figure who ensured that balance endured, that order triumphed over chaos, and that Egypt's heart beat in rhythm with the cosmos. The dawn of dynastic Egypt was not loud or violent, but steady and purposeful. It rose like the sunrise over the Nile, gentle at first, but destined to shine brilliantly across millennia. And now, as we stand at the threshold of Egypt's first great age, the old kingdom waits ahead of us, the age of the pyramids, the age of stone, the age when kings built mountains to touch eternity. Imhotep, and the step pyramid of Djoser. In the soft light of early morning, long before the Great Pyramids of Giza pierced the sky, there lived a man whose mind shone brighter than the desert sun. His name was Imhotep, a name that would echo through thousands of years, a name that would rise from the dust of history and linger among gods. But before he was a legend, Imhotep was simply a young man of the old kingdom, observant, patient, and endlessly curious. He was born in a humble home, to parents who could not know that their son would one day be remembered as one of the greatest minds of the ancient world. As a child, Imhotep watched everything. He studied the way stones cracked under heat. He observed how birds sheltered themselves with angled branches. He listened to healers who spoke of herbs and bones and breath. And he absorbed knowledge like the Nile absorbs the rain. In time, his talents became impossible to ignore. Scribes spoke of him with admiration. Craftsmen sought his advice. Priests noticed his calm presence and disciplined mind. And eventually, word of Imhotep reached the ears of Pharaoh Djoser, the ruler of Egypt's third dynasty. Djoser was a pharaoh who dreamed boldly. He wished to build monuments that would stand for eternity. And he saw in Imhotep not just a scholar, but a visionary. So he brought the young man into his court. He named Imhotep his chief architect, his high priest, his physician, and his trusted advisor. Rarely in Egyptian history would a common-born man rise to such heights. Yet Imhotep wore his greatness with humility, moving through the royal court with quiet confidence. And then came the moment that would change history. Djoser desired a tomb unlike any before it. something greater than the simple mastebas that had been used for generations, a structure that would lift him toward the heavens, guiding his spirit upward in the afterlife. He turned to Imhotep, and Imhotep began to imagine something the world had never seen, a building not made of mud brick, but of solid limestone. A structure that did not lie flat on the earth, but climbed upward in great terraces, a monument that could touch the sky. He envisioned the first pyramid, not the smooth-sided pyramids we know today, but a step pyramid rising layer by layer, like a staircase for a king's soul. He chose the sacred necropolis of Saqqara, high above the desert plateau. From there, one could see the fertile Nile Valley on one side and the endless sands on the other, a perfect place for a pharaoh to journey from life into eternity. The work began with thousands of laborers, skilled workers, stonecutters, architects, and priests, all moving in harmony. Imhotep directed every detail. Stones were quarried from nearby cliffs. Workers shaped the blocks with copper tools, sanding them smooth with endless patience. Sledges carried the stones across sand, pulled by long lines of men chanting in unison. Water was poured along the sand to reduce friction, allowing the sledges to glide forward. Dust rose with every step. The sun beat down upon bare backs and sweating brows, but the work continued, steady as the Nile's current. Imhotep designed the structure in 6 great steps, each one smaller than the one below. Together they formed a towering monument, rising higher than any structure ever built by human hands up to that time. The step pyramid stood at over 60 meters tall, an impossible height for the ancient world. To the people of Egypt, it seemed like a holy mountain rising from the desert, a meeting place between earth and sky, a place where the spirit of a king could ascend to join Ra in the heavens. But Imhotep's masterpiece did not end with the pyramid itself. He designed an entire funerary complex around it: temples, courtyards, shrines, chapels, and ceremonial halls. He built walls carved with delicate stone columns shaped like bundled reeds, echoing the simplicity of early homes along the Nile. He created ceremonial passages for the Hatshepsut festival, a ritual meant to renew the pharaoh's power even after death. Every detail was symbolic. Every stone held meaning. Every chamber whispered the beliefs of a civilization obsessed with eternity. When the pyramid was complete, Egypt was transformed. Never before had humans shaped stone on such a scale. The step pyramid became a marvel, a testament to human ingenuity and divine inspiration. People from distant settlements traveled through the desert just to witness it. Priests performed rituals in its shadow, and Pharaoh Djoser stood before it in awe. He knew, as all of Egypt knew, that Imhotep had changed the world. But Imhotep's brilliance extended far beyond architecture. He was a healer whose knowledge of herbs and anatomy was unmatched. He understood how the human body worked, how bones knitted themselves back together, how fevers rose and fell, how wounds could be soothed. He wrote medical texts, though most have been lost to time. He studied astronomy, calculating the movements of the stars and the cycles of the heavens. He served as a priest, an advisor, a mathematician, a philosopher, a man whose mind seemed to reach into every corner of knowledge. And because of this, generations after his death would look back upon him with reverence and wonder. Over time, legends grew stories about a man whose wisdom seemed almost supernatural, a man who could cure the sick with a touch of his hand, a man who could speak with the gods, a man whose ideas shaped the destiny of Egypt. Eventually, Imhotep was worshipped as a deity, the god of medicine, knowledge, and architecture. Temples were dedicated to him. Priests prayed in his name. People carried small statues of him for protection and healing. He became, in spirit, what he had always been in life, a beacon of wisdom and guidance. And even now, thousands of years later, the step pyramid still stands in the desert, its steps worn by time, but its presence unshaken. In the quiet hours before sunrise, the desert winds whisper through its corridors. Shadows stretch across its ancient stones, and if you listen closely, you might imagine the faint echo of chisels, the murmur of workers, and the distant, steady voice of Imhotep directing the birth of architectural history. The Step Pyramid marks not just the tomb of a king, but the dawn of a genius. It is the first mountain built by human hands, the first monument that dared to reach upward, and the first spark of an idea that would lead, centuries later, to the Great Pyramids of Giza. Without Imhotep, history would look very different. Without the Step Pyramid, Egyptian architecture would not have taken its monumental shape. And without Djoser's trust in a young visionary, the ancient world might never have learned what humans are capable of when imagination becomes stone. So tonight, as we leave Saqqara behind and follow the Nile northward, we carry with us the quiet brilliance of the man who built the first giant of Egypt, Imhotep, the architect of eternity. His pyramid rising behind us like a stairway to the sky, a promise that greatness was only beginning. As we leave Saqqara behind, the desert opens like a book of pale gold, each dune a silent page shaped by the wind. The Nile glimmers in the distance, flowing gently under the morning light, and far to the north, rising from the horizon like three giant steps of eternity, stands the most iconic monument of ancient Egypt, the Giza Plateau, a place where stone meets sky, a place where time holds its breath, a place where pharaohs dreamed of immortality and built mountains to touch the sun. Tonight, we walk toward the Great Pyramids of Giza, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, the eternal guardians of Egypt's old kingdom. Before we reach them, imagine approaching the plateau as someone living more than 4,500 years ago. No skyscrapers block the view. No city hum surrounds the desert. Just endless dunes, bright sunlight, and three colossal silhouettes rising above everything else. Their presence would feel impossible, almost unreal, as if the gods themselves had carved them from the horizon. But these were not the work of gods. They were the work of human hands guided by human vision, and at the center of that vision stood a single man, Pharaoh Khufu. Khufu, also known as Cheops, inherited a united Egypt, a powerful court, and the ambition of a king who wished to surpass everything that came before him. His father, Sneferu, had already experimented with pyramid building, the bent pyramid, the red pyramid, massive structures that taught architects valuable lessons. But Khufu dreamed bigger. He envisioned something beyond architecture. He wanted a monument that would define eternity. A pyramid taller, wider, and more perfectly aligned than anything the world had ever seen. A monument that would proclaim his divine role as Horus on earth and Osiris in death. And so, under his order, the Great Pyramid was born. Picture the plateau before construction began. A high limestone outcrop overlooking the valley, shaped by millions of years of wind and time. Khufu's architects chose this place carefully, solid bedrock for stability, a commanding view, and alignment with the stars, especially the northern sky, where the imperishable circumpolar stars spun forever without setting. For the Egyptians believed the spirit of the pharaoh would join those eternal stars after death, and so they aligned the Great Pyramid to the true north, more precisely than many modern structures. The work began with surveying, leveling, measuring. Thousands of skilled workers, not slaves, but trained laborers, lived in nearby villages constructed just for them. They ate bread, fish, onions, and drank beer brewed fresh each day. They worked in rotating teams, one group after another, like waves of human will shaping stone. The limestone blocks were quarried from the plateau itself. Copper chisels rang out against rock from dawn until dusk. Stonecutters worked with rhythmic patience, carving blocks that weighed 2, 3, or even more than 10 tons. Nearby, boats floated on the Nile, bringing fine white limestone from Tura and granite from Aswan stones that traveled hundreds of kilometers to reach Giza. As workers dragged sledges across the sand, they poured water ahead of the runners to reduce friction. The sand hardened under the moisture, allowing the massive blocks to glide forward. Teams chanted in unison, their footsteps steady, their voices rising in the hot desert air. Pulled by hundreds of hands, the stones inched closer to the plateau, day after day. Then came the ramps, long earthen causeways built to raise the blocks higher and higher. No one knows the exact method used. Perhaps straight ramps, perhaps zigzagging paths hugging the pyramid's face, perhaps an internal spiral ramp hidden within. But however they built it, the result remains one of humanity's greatest achievements. The base of the Great Pyramid alone covers more than 13 acres. Each side measures over 230 meters. When completed, it rose to a height of around 146.5 meters taller than any human-made structure for more than 3,800 years. Its sides were once covered in smooth white casing stones, polished to brilliance, reflecting sunlight like a mirror. Imagine seeing it then not worn and broken, but gleaming, a perfect, radiant mountain of light. A pyramid that could be seen from miles away, shining like a second sun rising from the earth. This was not just a tomb, it was a cosmic machine, a symbolic stairway, a durable spell for eternal life. Deep inside the pyramid, hidden within layers of stone, Khufu's chambers were constructed, corridors aligned with star paths, air shafts angled toward constellations that represented the afterlife. The grand gallery rose like a cathedral carved from limestone, its sloping walls guiding the spirit toward the heavens. Every dimension, every angle, every chamber carried meaning. The pyramid itself was a map of the cosmos, a model of creation built from stone. And the workers who built it understood that they were not just raising a monument for a king, they were participating in a cycle of rebirth. Each stone was a prayer, each step forward a gesture of devotion, each chant a heartbeat of a nation believing that by honoring their pharaoh, they honored the gods who shaped their world. When the Great Pyramid was finished, it dominated the landscape. But Khufu was not alone in building at Giza. Just beside his colossal monument, his son Khafre constructed a pyramid of his own. Khafre's pyramid appears taller from certain angles because it sits on higher ground, and near its base rests another marvel, the Great Sphinx, a creature of lion's body and human head, facing east toward the rising sun. Though its face is worn by time, many believe it once bore the likeness of Khafre, watching eternally over the plateau. The Sphinx blended power and wisdom, the strength of a lion, the intellect of a king. Its gaze anchored the entire complex, as if guarding both the pyramids and the desert beyond. To the south, Menkaure built the smallest of the three pyramids, though smallest is only relative. His pyramid stands over 60 meters tall, a giant by any measure. Its lower casing was made of red granite, giving it a warm glow under sunlight. The three pyramids together formed a sacred triad, a mirror of the stars in Orion's belt, which the Egyptians associated with Osiris. Thus, the Giza plateau became more than a cemetery. It became a celestial landscape carved into the earth, a dialogue between heaven and stone. Inside temples, priests performed rituals for the pharaohs long after their deaths. Offerings of bread, milk, incense, flowers, and sacred oils were placed in chambers where the spirits were believed to roam. Flames flickered gently across walls carved with hieroglyphs. Shadows danced like silent guardians. Outside, people came to Giza during festivals, walking among the giants of stone, feeling the presence of kings long gone but never forgotten. For centuries, the pyramids stood untouched. Empires rose and fell beyond Egypt's borders, but Giza remained eternal. Travelers from foreign lands wrote of their astonishment, Some believed the pyramids must have been built by gods, some believed giants erected them, and some, unable to comprehend the sheer scale, insisted they were older than humanity itself. But all who saw them felt the same thing: awe. Even now, thousands of years later, the pyramids stir the same response. Standing before them, you feel small, you feel humbled, and yet you feel connected to something vast, ancient, and enduring. A reminder that humans, even in distant ages, dreamed boldly and reached beyond what seemed possible. Today, wind sweeps across the plateau, carrying sand that gently kisses the stones. Tourists come from every corner of the world, stepping where ancient priests once walked. The white casing stones have mostly vanished, removed over centuries for other building projects. The tips are weathered, the edges softened, but the heart of the pyramids remains unbroken. Time has touched them, but time has not defeated them. They still stand like guardians of memory, silent monuments to human imagination, to faith, to the desire to transcend mortality. And if you visit at sunset, when the sky glows deep orange and the shadows stretch long across the desert, you might feel as though the past has slipped closer, as if the workers, the priests, and the pharaohs still linger in the warm air, as if the chant of a distant crew still echoes through the sand, as if Khufu himself still dreams within the limestone corridors, waiting for the sun to rise once more. The Great Pyramids of Giza are not simply structures. They are the breath of a civilization, the embodiment of a belief system where kings became stars, stone became spirit, and the horizon became a doorway to eternity. And as we turn now from the brilliance of Giza and look beyond the plateau, the story of the Old Kingdom continues, moving toward a time of change, struggle, and eventual collapse. A time when even Egypt, powerful as it was, could not escape the trials of nature and the pressures of a shifting world. And so we step gently toward the twilight of the Old Kingdom, where drought, hunger, and chaos began to rise like shadows over the land. But the pyramids remain behind us, glowing faintly in the desert night, reminders of what humans can build when they dream of eternity. When the pyramids of Giza were newly built, their white limestone surfaces shining under the sun, Egypt seemed invincible. The kingdom was wealthy, organized, and confident. Its rulers commanded armies, priests, and architects with ease. Fields along the Nile burst with grain, villages thrived, temples glowed with offerings, and the people believed the blessings of the gods would never fade. But history, like the Nile, moves in cycles, rising, falling, shifting, with forces beyond any human control. And just as the river gives life, it can also take it away. Egypt learned this truth slowly at first, and then all at once. For Egypt's prosperity depended entirely on one thing: the annual flooding of the Nile. Every year, without fail, the river rose as rains fell in distant lands far to the south. The water swept over the fields, leaving behind rich black silt, the foundation of Egyptian life. But then, one year, the flood came late. Not disastrously late, just enough to make farmers anxious. The next year, it came weak. And the next, weaker still. The priests watched their sacred measuring rods with unease. The scribes noted that the waterline fell lower each season, and the people whispered, quietly at first, then louder, "Has something disturbed Ma'at? Has chaos returned to the land?" What Egypt did not know was that far beyond its borders, the climate across the ancient world was shifting. Rains in the Ethiopian highlands grew erratic. Monsoon patterns changed, and slowly, painfully, the Nile stopped rising. What followed was one of the longest and harshest droughts in the history of the ancient world, a catastrophe that would last 140 years. Imagine the shock of an entire kingdom watching its lifeline shrink year after year. Imagine farmers walking into dry fields, their hands sinking into powder, not soil. Imagine priests, climbing the stairs of temples to pray for floodwaters that never came. The Nile's voice, once strong and generous, grew silent. At first, the kingdom tried to endure. Grain stores were opened, rations were measured carefully. The government sent expeditions south, hoping for signs of rising water, but nothing changed. The sky remained clear and merciless. The sun burned the land hotter each decade, and slowly, famine began to spread. Harvests failed across multiple regions. Villagers walked for miles carrying empty baskets. Children grew thin. Homes were abandoned. And those who survived learned to live with hunger like a shadow that never left their side. With famine came fear. And with fear came instability. For as the Nile dried, so did the authority of the pharaoh. A king's divine legitimacy depended on maintaining Ma'at cosmic order, including the balance of nature. If the Nile failed, some believed the king had lost favor with the gods. Others believed the gods were angry. Either belief was dangerous. Provincial governors, once loyal administrators, began to act independently to protect their people. Some hoarded grain. Some built private militias. Some declared themselves rulers in all but name. Egypt, once unified, began to fracture into dozens of small power centers. The great centralized administration that had built the pyramids strained under the weight of crisis, and eventually it cracked. Many records from this period describe deep desperation. One ancient text, written centuries later but recalling this era, says, "The river is empty, men cross on foot, the poor eat their children, the rich suffer like the poor. The temples are abandoned. Ma'at has been driven from the land." Whether these lines were literal or poetic, they reveal the agony of a nation unraveling from within. Trade collapsed. Caravans stopped moving. Ships carried fewer goods. The scent of incense faded from temple courtyards. Offerings dwindled. Priests struggled to maintain rituals that had been performed for generations. As Egypt's central government weakened, some provinces rose in rebellion. Local lords claimed titles, raised armies, and fortified their cities. In Lower Egypt, alliances shifted like desert winds. In Upper Egypt, powerful families turned their nomes, the regional districts, into independent kingdoms. The once unified land of the two crowns became a mosaic of rival territories. For decades, kings ruled in name, but not in reality. Their orders carried little weight outside the capital. The golden age of the Old Kingdom, the age of pyramid building, stability, and cosmic harmony slipped into memory. And yet, Egypt did not collapse all at once. The pyramids still stood, silent and untouched. The great temples still cast long shadows across the desert. And in some pockets of the kingdom, people still clung to hope. They prayed that the Nile would rise again. They prayed that the gods would return with mercy. But the drought refused to break. Generations were born, lived, and died, never knowing the old abundance. The lessons of stability gave way to lessons of survival. Families learned to ration whatever little food they had. Children grew up never seeing a true flood. Elders told stories of the past, stories that sounded mythical compared to the harshness of the present. In this climate of uncertainty, the role of the pharaoh changed. Instead of being a beacon of divine power, the king became a symbol of lost glory. People questioned whether the gods still heard their prayers. Some regions stopped sending tribute to the crown entirely. Others fortified themselves, fearing attack from neighboring nomes competing for dwindling resources. As order weakened, chaos crept in, not with dramatic battles, but with quiet, relentless hunger. And yet, the Old Kingdom endured longer than expected. Even in hardship, Egyptian society remained remarkably organized. The cultural memory of Ma'at, balance, justice, and cosmic order kept total collapse at bay. But eventually, The weight of drought, famine, and political fragmentation became too heavy. The old kingdom, which had risen to unimaginable heights, entered its twilight. The final blow came when the central government could no longer fund its massive building projects, maintain its bureaucracy, or control the provinces. Pharaoh after pharaoh took the throne, but none held power long. Some ruled only a few years, some perhaps only months. Their names are faint in the historical record, like footprints erased by wind. Eventually, Egypt slipped into what historians call the First Intermediate Period, a time of division, local rule, and quiet struggle. A time when the crown lost its brilliance. A time when the pyramids of Giza stood alone, silent giants watching over a land in turmoil. And yet, even in this long night, something remarkable happened. The Egyptians did not lose themselves. They did not abandon their beliefs. They did not forget the lessons of the past. Instead, they adapted. Local leaders learned to govern their nomes efficiently. Communities worked together to survive. Art and writing continued, though in simpler forms. Temples maintained shrines even with fewer offerings. And slowly, beneath the surface of hardship, seeds of rebirth began to grow. In a fragmented land, two major powers eventually emerged, one in the north and one in the south. They competed, negotiated, and strengthened themselves. And over time, the southern kingdom of Thebes gained momentum. Theban rulers believed they had been chosen to restore Ma'at. They built alliances, reclaimed land, and revived old rituals. Their leaders carried titles full of aspiration. He who brings order, he who returns the two lands to harmony. Little by little, Thebes extended its influence, pushing northward, not with arrogance, but with determination. And after generations of effort, Thebes succeeded in reuniting Egypt under a single crown. This marked the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, a new chapter, a new dawn, a rebirth from the ashes of drought and chaos. The Nile began to flood again. The fields grew green. Trade routes reopened. Temples filled with incense. And the people, who had weathered more than a century of hardship, finally felt the warmth of stability returning. Looking back now, the fall of the Old Kingdom was not the end of Egypt. It was a transformation. A reminder that even the greatest civilizations face storms. A reminder that the Nile's gifts can be taken away. A reminder that the cycle of life includes decline as well as growth. And yet, Egypt endured. Not because of stone pyramids or mighty kings, but because of the resilience woven into the heart of its people. A resilience that allowed them to rise again, stronger and wiser. As the Old Kingdom faded into memory, the pyramids of Giza stood unchanged. They watched the drought, they watched the chaos, they watched the slow return of order. Silent guardians of a past greatness, waiting patiently for Egypt to rise once more. And now, with the Middle Kingdom ahead of us, the story continues, a story of rebirth, innovation, literature, and new forms of power. But the Old Kingdom, with all its glory and sorrow, remains the foundation upon which everything else was built. A testament to human ambition, a testament to divine belief, and a testament to a civilization that refused to vanish, even when the river that nourished it turned away. When the long shadow of drought finally loosened its grip on the land, Egypt emerged shaken but still alive. The scars of the Old Kingdom's fall lingered across the Nile Valley, abandoned villages, shattered granaries, fractured provinces, but beneath the ruins, hope slowly stirred. People who had endured hardship for generations could sense change in the wind. The river began to rise again. The fields softened under new floods, and Egypt, weary but resilient, prepared for rebirth. Yet the country remained divided. Local rulers governed their nomes like small kingdoms. In the north, powerful families of Heracleopolis claimed to be the rightful heirs of Egypt. In the south, Thebes, a rising city of strong leaders and fierce devotion, began to assert its own claim. The two lands were split once more, not by geography, but by loyalty. But amid this division, one man would emerge from Thebes like a calming tide returning to the shore. His name was Mentuhotep II, a king of patience, strategy, and quiet determination. A king who believed that Egypt should not remain broken. A king chosen, perhaps, by destiny itself to restore the light of Ma'at. When Mentuhotep II took the throne, he inherited not power, but conflict. Heracleopolis controlled the north, Thebes controlled the south, and the land in between lay tense, exhausted from years of struggle. But Mentuhotep II was not intimidated. He governed his southern realm with order, discipline, and fairness. He consolidated his local authority, built alliances, and strengthened his army. And slowly, village by village, nome by nome, he pushed northward. His efforts were not swift or loud. They were measured, they were deliberate, they were like the Nile itself. Persistent, patient, unstoppable. After years of conflict, the decisive moment arrived. The armies of Thebes and Heracleopolis met in battle. It was a confrontation that would shape the fate of Egypt. Mentuhotep II's troops fought with determination, fueled by the belief that unity was not just political, it was sacred. When the dust settled, Thebes emerged victorious, Heracleopolis fell, and Egypt, for the first time since the end of the Old Kingdom, stood under one ruler again. Mentuhotep II declared himself the king of Upper and Lower Egypt. He wore both crowns, the tall white crown of the south and the wide red crown of the north. Just as Narmer had done nearly 1,000 years earlier, unity had returned. A new era had begun, the Middle Kingdom, the Age of Restoration. Under Mentuhotep II, Egypt slowly exhaled. Peace spread across the land. Trade revived. Temples reopened. Fields returned to life. And the people, grateful and weary, looked to their king with admiration. He built his mortuary complex at Deir el-Bahari, an elegant terraced structure carved into the cliffs overlooking the Nile. It was not as massive as a pyramid, but it possessed a serene spiritual beauty, a harmony of nature and architecture, a symbol of a king who sought balance rather than grandeur. Mentuhotep II ruled for more than half a century, long enough for Egypt to heal, long enough for stability to take root. And when he finally passed into the afterlife, the kingdom he left behind was no longer wounded, it was ready to flourish. After his reign, a line of successors continued his work. They maintained unity, strengthened administration, and supported agricultural expansion. Egypt grew steady once again, though its capital would eventually shift back to It-Chitawi under the later 12th dynasty. There, a new generation of rulers, especially Amenemhat I and Senusret I, would establish one of the most brilliant periods of Egyptian history. But the foundations for this greatness were laid by Mentuhotep II, the unifier whose quiet strength guided Egypt out of darkness. With unity restored, Egypt turned its attention outward. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs saw an opportunity beyond their borders, the land of Nubia to the south. Nubia was rich in gold, cattle, exotic goods, and trade routes that stretched deep into Africa. For Egypt, weakened during the previous era, Nubia had once been a threat. But during the Middle Kingdom, it became a gateway to wealth. Pharaohs launched campaigns southward, securing fortresses at strategic points along the Nile. Massive structures like the fortress of Semna rose on rocky hills above the river, commanding the waterway like stone guardians. These fortresses were not merely military outposts, they were centers of trade, culture, and political influence. Through them, Egypt controlled gold mines, ivory caravans, and trade with distant kingdoms. The flow of wealth into Egypt grew steadily, enriching temples, supporting royal projects, and strengthening Egypt's international presence. With prosperity came creativity. The Middle Kingdom became a golden age of literature. Scribes wrote poetry, teachings, stories, and philosophical reflections that still survive today. The tale of Sinue, the instruction of Amenemhat, and the dialogue of a man with his bar all date to this period. They reveal a culture more introspective, more emotional, more human than the rigid formality of earlier texts. The Middle Kingdom was an age of thought as much as power. Among its most profound developments was the evolution of funerary beliefs. Death, to the Egyptians, had never been an ending, only a transition. But in the Middle Kingdom, the journey into the afterlife gained new depth, new symbolism, new stories. The idea of the Duat, the mysterious realm of spirits, grew more detailed, more vivid, more intimate. People imagined the afterlife not as a distant myth, but as a personal journey every soul would undertake. Funerary texts, once reserved only for kings, began to appear in the coffins of nobles and even common people. These coffin texts described spells, prayers, and guidance for navigating the Duat. They provided maps of the underworlds, rivers, and gates. They named guardians a soul would meet. They taught the deceased how to speak with gods. And they promised that, with proper knowledge, one could reach the field of reeds, a peaceful paradise mirroring the Nile Valley. The heart of these beliefs was deeply spiritual. The Egyptians imagined the Duat as a place of shadows, light, trials, and renewal. It was like a long river of stars flowing beneath the earth. Ra himself traveled through the Duat each night, fighting the serpent Apophis and rising reborn at dawn. And so, every soul sought to follow Ra's path, joining the cycle of eternal rebirth. Funerary practices became more elaborate. Mummification improved dramatically. Bodies were preserved with greater care, using resins, oils, and linen wrappings arranged with ritual precision. Tombs were decorated with scenes of offering and daily life, ensuring the deceased had everything needed in eternity. Even the poorest families tried to bury their loved ones with small charms or protective amulets, tiny symbols of hope. This shift reflected a society that had endured suffering and learned to value life and death equally. The Middle Kingdom Egyptians understood fragility. They understood resilience. And they embraced the afterlife with a quiet, solemn reverence, a faith that soothed the wounds left by the famine years. But stability, as always, is temporary. Even in moments of strength, forces beyond Egypt's borders were shifting. New peoples moved across the ancient world, new tools and weapons appeared in distant lands, and soon, Egypt would face a challenge unlike any it had ever known. A challenge not of climate, but of conquest. In the eastern delta, near the Sinai border, groups of migrants began to settle. They came from the Levant traders, shepherds, warriors drawn by Egypt's fertile lands. At first, they lived peacefully among the Egyptians, but over time, these groups grew larger, wealthier, and more influential. They brought new ideas, especially the horse and the chariot, two innovations Egypt had never seen before. These migrants, collectively known as the Hyksos, slowly built their own centers of power. They mastered trade, they forged alliances, and eventually they seized control of the northern delta. Egypt, unprepared for an enemy with chariot warfare, could not resist effectively. The Hyksos advanced with speed unknown to traditional Egyptian armies. Their horses thundered across the delta fields. Their chariots sliced through battle lines with terrifying momentum. And one by one, the cities of Lower Egypt submitted. The Hyksos declared themselves pharaohs of the 15th dynasty rulers of Egypt. For the first time in its long history, Egypt fell under foreign control. Not through brute force alone, but through technology, strategy, and decades of gradual influence. To the Egyptians, this was unthinkable. The idea that foreigners could rule the land of the gods felt like a violation of Ma'at. Temples in the north came under foreign oversight. Traditional rituals were disrupted. Local rulers in the south simmered with resentment. Yet even in this dark moment, Egypt did not shatter. The native Egyptian kingdom survived in Upper Egypt, centered in Thebes. They paid tribute to the Hyksos, but never accepted them in spirit. And as years passed, a quiet determination grew within the Theban rulers. A determination to reclaim their homeland. The Hyksos did not destroy Egypt. They unintentionally strengthened it. Egyptians learned from their chariot warfare. They adopted new weapons, composite bows, bronze swords, horse-drawn chariots. They studied the Hyksos methods, preparing silently, and when the time came, they rose. King Sekenenretau of Thebes led the first resistance. He died in battle, his skull later discovered with brutal wounds, a testament to his courage. His son Kamose continued the fight, pushing northward, and finally, Ahmose, the last of the family line, marched with determination and reclaimed Egypt. He expelled the Hyksos, seized Avaris, and restored native rule. With his victory, the Middle Kingdom ended, but Egypt emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to enter its greatest age yet. This triumph opened the gates to the new kingdom, the empire of Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Ramses II, and countless wonders. But the Middle Kingdom remained forever the age of renewal, an era born from suffering, strengthened by unity, enriched by trade, deepened by spirituality, and tested by invasion. A quiet, introspective, poetic age. A chapter between the stone giants of the Old Kingdom and the blazing glory of the New. An age where Egypt rediscovered itself. An age where the journey into the Duat became a shared dream of all people. And an age whose ending, though marked by foreign conquest, planted the seeds of Egypt's future greatness. The Middle Kingdom did not shine with the blinding brilliance of the pyramids. Its monuments were gentler, its stories more human, its spirit more contemplative, but its endurance, its creativity, and its courage carried Egypt through one of its most transformative periods. And tonight, as we close this chapter, the Nile flows quietly beside us again, steady, ancient, eternal, preparing to lead us into the golden age that comes next. When the Middle Kingdom faded and the Hyksos seized the delta, Egypt entered one of its darkest nights. Foreign rulers sat on the throne of the two lands. Chariots thundered across fields that had once been peaceful. Shrines to Egyptian gods felt dimmer, quieter, as if the divine world itself held its breath. But in the south, in the city of Thebes, a spark of resistance flickered. It came from a royal family that refused to accept defeat. A family whose determination would shape the destiny of Egypt. This family gave the world a boy, small, quiet, but destined for greatness. His name was Ahmose, and he would become the first pharaoh of the new kingdom. Ahmose grew up hearing stories of Hyksos cruelty and ambition. He learned that his father, Sekenenretau, had died fighting them, his skull shattered in battle, a silent testimony to his bravery. He learned that his brother Kamose continued the struggle, pushing northward, reclaiming lands, refusing to surrender. And he learned that Egypt's freedom was not a gift, but a duty passed from one generation to the next. Ahmose was still a child when his brother died. The crown passed to him before he reached maturity. The weight of Egypt's hope rested on shoulders that had barely grown strong, but Ahmose carried it with quiet resolve. Thebes rallied behind him. Generals whispered strategies in dim torchlight. Priests prayed for divine favor, offering incense to Amun, the rising god of Thebes. And when Ahmose came of age, he did what his father and brother had died attempting. He marched north. His army was not the same as the old Egyptian forces. The Hyksos had introduced new weapons, composite bows, curved swords, horse-drawn chariots. Ahmose studied them, mastered them, and used them against their inventors. Egypt rearmed with determination. Chariots were built, archers trained relentlessly, infantry drilled day after day beneath the desert sun, and together they became a force unlike any seen before in the Nile Valley. Ahmose moved with patience, reclaiming territory step by step. He took cities along the river, securing supply lines and morale. He liberated villages that had lived under Hyksos rule for decades. Some greeted him with tears, some with disbelief, but all felt that something long slumbering in Egypt had awakened. Finally, Ahmose reached Osiris, the Hyksos capital, a fortified city of foreign kings, chariots, and high walls. It was here that the future of Egypt would be decided. The battle raged fiercely. The dust of chariot wheels rose like storm clouds. Arrows flew through the air like swarms of locusts. And in the midst of it all, Ahmose stood at the front, fighting not only for victory but for the soul of his nation. The siege dragged on, but Egypt's determination did not waver. Day after day, Ahmose's forces tightened their grip on the city, and at last, the walls were breached. Osiris fell. The Hyksos fled toward Canaan, chased relentlessly by Ahmose's army. Egypt was free. But Ahmose did not stop at victory. He pursued the Hyksos into foreign lands to ensure they could not return. He conquered cities, secured borders, and strengthened Egypt's influence in the Levant. For the first time, Egypt looked beyond simple survival. It looked outward toward the world with ambition. Ahmose understood that Egypt could never again afford to be vulnerable. To protect itself, it had to become stronger than its rivals, more organized, more unified, more powerful. When he finally returned to Egypt, he was celebrated not just as a military hero but as a restorer of cosmic order. He reopened temples, restoring rituals that had been neglected during Hyksos rule. He gifted land and wealth to priests and soldiers who had fought by his side. He reorganized administration, ensuring that Egypt would never again be ruled by foreign hands. He revived arts, architecture, and culture, and he strengthened Amun, the god of Thebes, whose favor seemed to glow over Egypt's rebirth. Amun would soon become the most powerful deity in the entire Egyptian pantheon, and the royal family would forever tie their legitimacy to him. Under Ahmose, Egypt entered a new age of prosperity. Granaries filled once more. Trade routes reopened. Caravans traveled from Nubia with gold, ivory, and cattle. Merchants sailed north to the Levant with grain, linen, and papyrus. The land hummed again with life. The scars of the Middle Kingdom and Hyksos occupation began to heal, and the spirit of Egypt, proud, ancient, luminous, shone brighter than it had in centuries. In the quiet hallways of temples, scribes began recording his reign with reverence. Ahmose was not simply a king, he was a liberator, a unifier, a divine instrument of restoration. In later generations, he would be remembered as the founder of the 18th dynasty, the greatest dynasty in Egyptian history. His victory marked the beginning of the new kingdom, a period of military power, artistic brilliance, religious evolution, and global influence. For more than 5 centuries, Egypt would dominate the ancient world. Its kings and queens would become legends, its temples would grow larger than cities, and its story would echo across time. But at the heart of this golden age stood one man, Ahmose the king who freed Egypt from its conquerors, a man who rose from a childhood of loss to a reign of glory, a man who built not pyramids but an empire, a man whose footsteps led directly into the era of Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and Ramses the Great. And now, as the new kingdom opens before us like a sunrise over the desert, our journey continues into the life of one of the most extraordinary rulers of all time. a woman whose legacy was carved not by war, but by peace. A queen who became a king, a daughter of Egypt who defied tradition and shaped her own destiny. Her name was Hatshepsut. When the echoes of Thutmose's victories faded, and the new kingdom settled into its blossoming strength, Egypt entered an age of confidence. Pharaohs expanded borders, priests revived ancient rituals, and cities thrived along the river's winding path. But among all the kings who would guide Egypt through this golden era, one ruler would shine not through conquest, but through quiet brilliance. A ruler whose legacy whispered through stone terraces and incense-scented halls. A ruler unlike any Egypt had ever seen. Her name was Hatshepsut. She was born a princess of the powerful 18th dynasty, daughter of Thutmose I, a warrior king whose conquests stretched Egypt's borders deep into Nubia and Syria. From childhood, Hatshepsut walked the temple corridors at Thebes with confidence. She studied rituals, history, medicine, diplomacy, and the sacred language of hieroglyphs. She watched priests perform ceremonies for Amun, absorbing the rhythms of prayer like a second heartbeat. And above all, she learned to speak with authority, calm, measured, assured. Those who knew her sensed from early on that she was destined for something extraordinary. When her father died, the throne passed to her half-brother, Thutmose II, whom she married according to royal tradition. It was a political union, a bond meant to strengthen divine legitimacy. But fate would intervene again. Thutmose II died young, leaving behind an infant son, Thutmose III, born to a secondary wife. The child was far too young to rule. Egypt needed a steady hand. And so the court turned to Hatshepsut. She first acted as regent, guiding the kingdom while the young prince grew. She stood behind him in ceremonies, advising from the shadows with grace and composure. But the more she governed, the clearer it became that she possessed a rare gift, the ability to lead with both strength and gentleness, ambition and harmony. Her advisors recognized it, the priests recognized it, and eventually, the people recognized it too. After several years, Hatshepsut took a step no woman before her had ever fully taken. She declared herself pharaoh, not queen regent, not temporary caretaker, but Pharaoh, the living Horus, ruler of Upper and Lower Egypt. To solidify her authority, artists carved images of her wearing the traditional kilt of a king, the false beard of pharaonic divinity, and the royal crown. But the face beneath remained unmistakably hers, soft, calm, serene. This transformation was not a rejection of her womanhood. It was a bridge between worlds, a merging of symbolic language and divine expectation, allowing her to rule in a role shaped by centuries of masculine tradition. Egypt, remarkably, accepted her, not because she seized power, but because she ruled with wisdom that brought stability and prosperity. Hatshepsut understood something profound. Egypt did not always need a conqueror. Sometimes it needed a builder, a peacemaker, a visionary. And so her reign became one of harmony rather than war. While other pharaohs carved their legacy through battles, Hatshepsut carved hers through architecture, diplomacy, and trade. She strengthened ties with foreign kingdoms, sending expeditions across the Red Sea to Punt, a land of incense, myrrh trees, gold, ebony, and exotic animals. For Egyptians, Punt was almost mythical, a land touched by gods. Hatshepsut's expedition returned, with ships heavy with treasures, including living myrrh trees planted later in temple courtyards. Their fragrance perfumed the air for years, a living reminder of her success. But her greatest masterpiece was not a trade route, nor a treaty, nor a conquest. It was her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. The temple rose from the cliffs of western Thebes like a dream carved from sunlight. Terraces stepped upward in harmonious lines. Colonnades created deep rhythms of shadow and glow. Ramps connected the spaces in gentle ascension, as if guiding the soul toward the heavens. Even today, thousands of years later, the temple feels impossibly serene, a union of architecture and nature so perfect that it seems to breathe. In the temple's reliefs, Hatshepsut told her story, not boastfully, but with quiet wonder. She depicted her divine birth, her coronation, her expedition to Punt, and her devotion to Amun. She built shrines, restored sanctuaries, and revived ceremonies that had fallen into neglect. Under her rule, Egypt prospered without warfare. Fields were rich, trade expanded, art flourished. The people lived in peace, a rare luxury in the ancient world. As for Thutmose III, the young prince she had once protected, he grew up in her court. He trained as a warrior, studied administration, and prepared for the future. Although later generations would imagine conflict between them, the evidence tells a gentler story. During her lifetime, Egypt remained stable under their shared rule, she as pharaoh, he as her junior co-ruler. But all reigns must end. After more than 2 decades on the throne, Hatshepsut died quietly, without drama. Her passing was not marked by chaos, but by the gentle closing of a brilliant chapter. After her death, Thutmose III finally took full power. And then, something mysterious happened. Some of Hatshepsut's images and names were removed. Not violently at first, but gradually, years after her death. Temples were altered, reliefs were modified, statues were buried or hidden. Scholars believe the motive was not hatred, but restoration of traditional order, ensuring that the lineage of male kings appeared uninterrupted. In the symbolic language of Egypt, tradition mattered deeply. Even so, the erasure cast a veil of sadness over her memory. Yet time has a way of bringing truth back into the light. Centuries later, archaeologists uncovered her statues, her inscriptions, her temple, and her name rose again from the silence of history. Today, she is considered one of the greatest pharaohs Egypt ever produced, a ruler of peace, a ruler of vision, a ruler who guided Egypt not with a sword, but with a steady, open hand. When we stand before her temple at Deir el-Bahari, still glowing beneath the cliffs, we can almost feel her presence. A quiet strength, a gentle confidence, a soft voice speaking across time. She reminds us that power need not be violent, that leadership can be compassionate, that greatness comes in many forms. Hatshepsut's reign marked a rare moment in history when peace, beauty, architecture, and diplomacy shaped the destiny of an empire. And as we leave her terraces bathed in morning light, we walk onward into the next chapter of the new kingdom. A chapter ruled by the young boy she once protected, a boy who grew into one of the greatest military leaders the world has ever known, a man whose name still echoes in the sands of ancient battlefields. His name was Thutmose III. When Hatshepsut closed her eyes for the final time, Egypt did not tremble. The transition was calm, like the quiet drift between night and dawn. And the young prince she once raised in the safety of her court, Thutmose III, finally stepped into the full light of kingship. For years he had walked in her shadow. He had learned from generals, priests, scribes, and administrators. He had studied the temples she built. He had watched her rule not with war, but with harmony. But now, the throne was entirely his, and Thutmose III was ready to reshape Egypt in his own image. Where Hatshepsut's heart leaned toward peace, Thutmose's spirit burned with motion. He was a warrior at his core, swift, strategic, relentless. He trained with bow, spear, chariot, and sword. He ran with soldiers, marched in drills, and memorized the geography of Egypt's borders. He studied the maps of Canaan and Syria, where cities pledged loyalty only when convenient. He knew that Egypt's influence to the north was fragile. He knew that the kingdoms beyond the desert watched Egypt's internal transitions with hungry eyes. And as soon as Hatshepsut was gone, Those kingdoms tested Egypt's strength. Barely had the queen been laid to rest when the princes of the Levant rebelled. They formed alliances, forged secret plans, and gathered at a fortress city known as Megiddo. The coalition was led by the king of Kadesh, a formidable enemy with ambition as vast as the desert. If Megiddo fell to rebellion, Egypt would lose its foothold in Asia. If Egypt hesitated, the empire would crumble. Thutmose III understood the stakes. He prepared his army swiftly, decisively, like a young falcon taking its first dive. The march north began under a rising sun. Chariots rolled across the valley floor, archers carried quivers heavy with arrows. Foot soldiers moved in endless lines, carrying provisions, shields, and spears. Thutmose marched among them, not carried in luxury, but walking on dusty ground, sharing the sun that burned their backs. He knew that soldiers fight hardest for kings who stand beside them. And this king did. As they approached Megiddo, Thutmose III faced a decision that would define his legacy. There were 3 possible routes to reach the city. 2 were wide and safe. The third was narrow, winding, and dangerous, a path that forced soldiers to march single file along cliffs. His generals urged caution. They feared ambush. They feared disaster. But Thutmose III saw what they did not. The rebels expected him to choose the safer paths. The narrow route was unexpected, the last place they would anticipate an Egyptian army. And so, with calm conviction, he chose the dangerous road. His soldiers trusted him. They followed. The march through the narrow pass was silent, tense, breathless. The cliffs pressed close on either side. One misstep could send a chariot crashing into the ravine below. But Thutmose's gamble paid off. They emerged from the pass to find the rebels unprepared, scrambling to reassemble their armies. Egypt struck first. The Battle of Megiddo began. Arrows filled the sky like swarms of dark birds. Chariots clashed, wheels rattling against stone. Shields shone in the sun as soldiers locked into formation. Thutmose III led from his chariot, bow in hand, urging his troops forward. The rebels broke under the force of the surprise attack. Some fled to the city. Others sought safety behind Megiddo's walls. But Egypt held the field. And then, a moment of human nature altered the course of the battle. Instead of pursuing the retreating enemy immediately, Egyptian soldiers paused to gather spoils, chariots, armor, gold, horses, and captured equipment. This delay allowed many rebels to slip inside Megiddo before the gates slammed shut. The battle had been won, but the siege had only begun. For 7 long months, Egypt surrounded Megiddo. Thutmose III refused to leave until the city surrendered. He built supply lines, fortified positions, and cut the rebels off from outside help. Every morning, the sun rose over the camp and set behind the fortress. Every evening, torches glowed along Egyptian ramparts, steady and unyielding. Inside Megiddo, famine and fear tightened their grip, and eventually, the city surrendered. Thutmose III granted mercy a strategic choice. By sparing the leaders, he ensured loyalty. By sparing the people, he restored stability. By sparing the city, he demonstrated the balance of power and restraint. Megiddo became the first of 17 major campaigns he would lead across his lifetime. Campaign after campaign, he carved Egypt's influence deeper into the Levant. Cities fell into alliance. Trade routes opened. Tributes flowed: gold, copper, livestock, fine oils, rare woods, lapis lazuli, horses, and captives. Thutmose III transformed Egypt from a powerful kingdom into a true empire. He marched north again and again. He captured Kadesh. He reached the Euphrates River. He crossed into lands that had never seen Egyptian banners before. Wherever he went, he forged new alliances, built garrisons, and secured vassal states. His strategies were precise, elegant, and relentlessly effective. No Egyptian ruler before or after matched the scale of his conquests. It is why later historians called him the Napoleon of Egypt. Not for ruthlessness, but for brilliance. But Thutmose III's greatness was not limited to the battlefield. He was also a builder. He expanded temples across Egypt, especially at Karnak, where he added pillars, shrines, obelisks, and sacred gardens. He commissioned artworks, statues, and inscriptions celebrating Egypt's triumphs. He organized administrative reforms, ensured fair taxation, and promoted loyal officials. He encouraged botanical studies, bringing exotic plants from conquered lands to Egypt, a practice that enriched agriculture and medicine. He supported trade, diplomacy, and infrastructure. His reign was one of balanced war in foreign lands, prosperity at home. Yet beneath the glory, a quiet sadness lived in the shadows of his story. For many years, Thutmose III had been overshadowed by Hatshepsut. He respected her. He learned from her. But after becoming pharaoh in full, he began removing her name from certain monuments. Some believe it was resentment. Others believe it was political necessity, a desire to present a continuous male lineage to fortify his son's future claim. Whatever the reason, the act left a complicated mark on history. Yet even this does not diminish the truth that Hatshepsut shaped him, protected him, and allowed him time to grow into the king he became. When Thutmose III grew older, he passed his knowledge to his son, Amenhotep II, a prince strong enough to continue Egypt's military legacy. And when Thutmose III finally left the world of the living, he stepped gracefully into the realm of the dead, becoming one with the gods he had served all his life. His tomb, hidden deep in the Valley of the Kings, held inscriptions describing his divine journey. In those quiet, dark chambers, the greatest conqueror Egypt had ever known rested not with the fury of battle, but with the stillness of eternity. Thutmose III's reign remains a high point in Egyptian history, a moment when the empire stretched farther than ever, a moment when military brilliance and organized governance created unparalleled stability. A moment when Egypt stood at the center of the ancient world, radiant and unchallenged. And as we leave his story behind, we step into a very different chapter, a chapter not of conquest, but of spiritual upheaval, personal struggle, and radical change. A chapter ruled by a pharaoh unlike any other. A man whose devotion to a single god reshaped Egypt for a brief, brilliant, chaotic moment. His name was Akhenaten. When Thutmose III's conquests faded into the distance and Amenhotep II and III built their legacy of wealth and splendor, Egypt entered an age of dazzling prosperity. The empire stretched far across deserts and rivers. Luxury filled the royal courts. Temples glowed with gold and incense. Artists created statues so elegant that they seemed almost alive. And the city of Thebes shone like a jewel beside the Nile. Yet beneath the surface of this golden age, something began to shift, something subtle, then powerful, then world-changing. That shift would take form in a single man, a prince born into abundance, raised in ritual, but destined to walk a path no Egyptian king had taken before. His name was Akhenaten. Before he became pharaoh, Akhenaten was simply Amenhotep IV, son of Amenhotep III and Queen Tiye, one of Egypt's most influential royal women. He grew up in a palace filled with music, art, tutors, priests, and foreign ambassadors. But unlike his predecessors, he seemed distant from courtly pleasures. He preferred contemplation to celebration, stillness to ceremony, sunlight to shadow. Those who watched him sensed something unusual, a softness, a dreamlike quality, a quiet intensity that set him apart. Even as a young prince, he spent long hours in temples devoted to Aten, the radiant disk of the sun. Aten was not a new god, but under Akhenaten's gaze, the deity took on new meaning. To him, Aten was not merely the sun, Aten was everything. Aten was life, warmth, creation, breath itself. This devotion grew inside him like a seed, waiting for the right season to bloom. When he ascended the throne, Amenhotep IV embraced his role with solemn purpose. But as months passed, he drifted further from the traditional worship of Amun, the great god of Thebes. He attended fewer ceremonies. He visited fewer temples. Scribes noticed the shift. Priests whispered about it. Courtiers observed with growing unease. Then, in the 5th year of his reign, the change became undeniable. Amenhotep IV declared that Aten was not simply a god among gods. Aten was the only god worthy of devotion, a divine presence that did not hide in animal shapes or temple walls, but shone openly in the sky for all to see. To mark this transformation, the pharaoh changed his name. He became Akhenaten, the one who serves Aten. This name was more than symbolic. It was a declaration of revolution, a break from millennia of tradition, a new direction for the entire kingdom. And with this declaration came his boldest decision of all. He abandoned Thebes. Akhenaten left the city of Amun and moved east into the desert, choosing a barren, untouched strip of land for his new capital. He called it Akhetaten, the horizon of Aten. Today we know it as Amarna. It rose quickly from the sands. Temples without roofs opened directly to the sky. Streets aligned with the sun. Palaces gleamed with fresh plaster and bright paint. Everything in Amarna was built to honor Aten. The city felt open, airy, drenched in sunlight, a physical expression of Akhenaten's devotion. But with his devotion came disruption. The temples of Amun lost funding. Priests lost influence. Traditional rituals faded. Some statues were sealed away. Some inscriptions were altered. Some gods, especially Amun, were erased from public spaces. For a civilization that had always honored many gods, this was unthinkable. The spiritual fabric of Egypt strained under the weight of Akhenaten's new vision, yet Akhenaten seemed untouched by conflict. In art, he appeared gentle, serene, almost fragile. He broke with traditional royal imagery, commissioning statues that showed him with elongated limbs, soft features, and a curved body. Some saw ugliness, some saw beauty, most saw mystery. His queen, Nefertiti, stood beside him in equal grace, tall, elegant, luminous. Together they appeared in reliefs as loving parents, kissing their daughters, embracing each other, basking in Aten's rays. Never before had a royal couple been depicted with such tender intimacy. Their domestic scenes felt like windows into private moments, warm, human, vulnerable. Akhenaten seemed to believe that love itself was a form of worship. But while beauty filled Amarna, the empire beyond its borders grew restless. Vassal states pleaded for military support. Letters arrived from foreign kings, urgent and desperate. Enemies stirred. Alliances faltered. And Egypt, under Akhenaten's spiritual transformation, neglected the political world it had dominated for centuries. The pharaoh's attention was fixed not on war, but on worship, not on conquest, but on contemplation. And the vast machinery of empire began to weaken. Inside Egypt, famine and discontent appeared in whispers. Priests of Amun, long stripped of power, watched with quiet resentment. Nobles questioned the king's judgment. Common people, loyal to traditional gods, felt unseen in the shadow of Aten's brilliance. And even within Amarna, cracks formed beneath the painted walls. Akhenaten, wrapped in devotion, continued forward. He wrote hymns to Aten, long, poetic, filled with yearning. One line would echo through time: "O living Aten, source of all life." His words were tender, almost aching. They revealed a man seeking connection with something greater than himself, not for dominance, but for understanding. A man who wanted the divine to be simple, pure, universal, and bathed in light. A man who believed he was reshaping the world for the better. But change often brings shadows, and Akhenaten's reforms eventually created instability that could not be ignored. When his beloved wife Nefertiti vanished from records through death, exile, or political transition, Akhenaten seemed to fall deeper into solitude. His later years felt muted, almost hollow, a prophet king lost in his own vision, a dreamer drifting in the vastness of the desert. When Akhenaten died, the kingdom stood at a crossroads. Amarna remained unfinished, the empire weakened, the administration strained, and Aten's brief dominance began to fade like sunlight at dusk. Egypt, tired and confused, longed for stability, longed for tradition, longed for the familiar comfort of its old gods. To restore balance, the priests and officials turned to a child, a boy of 9 years. A boy raised in Amarna but destined to undo its legacy. A boy whose name would become one of the most famous in the world. Tutankhaten, soon to be Tutankhamun. With the boy king's coronation came a gentle reversal. Aten's temples fell quiet. The capital returned to Thebes, and the old gods were welcomed home once more. Akhenaten's story is one of beauty and tragedy, a tale of a man who dared to dream differently, who reached for spiritual purity, who loved deeply, thought deeply, and acted boldly, but whose vision isolated him from his people and weakened the empire he wished to elevate. His reign was a moment of cosmic experimentation, a sudden flare of sunlight in Egypt's long night sky. Brief, brilliant, controversial, haunting, and though the world he built crumbled soon after his death, his story remains unforgettable, a fragile melody woven into the vast symphony of Egyptian history. Now, as we leave the quiet ruins of Amarna behind us, we step into the story of the child who restored tradition, a boy king who died young yet became immortal. His name was Tutankhamun. When the dust of Amarna began to settle, and Akhenaten's sun faded over the desert, Egypt found itself standing at the edge of uncertainty. Temples had been abandoned, old gods had been silenced, allies across the empire begged for support that never came, and the hearts of the people longed for stability, for the familiar rhythm of tradition, the comfort of prayers whispered to many gods, not just one. In this moment of unrest, the throne passed to a child, a small boy with gentle eyes, a boy raised in the strange, luminous world of Aten, yet destined to restore everything his predecessor had undone. His name was Tutankhaten, but soon the world would know him as Tutankhamun. He was barely 9 years old when he became pharaoh, too young to understand war, too young to command armies, too young to carry the weight of an entire civilization. But Egypt had no one else, so the priests and advisors surrounded him with guidance. The seasoned courtier, Horemheb, the military general, they became the hands that shaped the kingdom, while the boy king grew into his role. Still, the decisions made in his name would reshape history. One of the first was small in sound but monumental in meaning. His name changed. Tutankhaten became Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. With that single transformation, the old gods stepped back into the light. Temples to Amun reopened. Statues once hidden were restored. Priests who had lost everything under Akhenaten returned to power. The capital moved back to Thebes, and Egypt exhaled as if waking from a long and confusing dream. The boy king, though still young, walked among the towering columns of Karnak as incense swirled around him. He offered milk, bread, and perfume to Amun. He bowed his head under gold crowns that weighed more than he did. He performed rituals with small, steady hands. And little by little, the people believed again that Egypt was safe. Tutankhamun married Ankhesenamun, his half-sister, daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. She was older, wiser, and became his closest companion. Their marriage was both political and tender, two children of a collapsing dynasty trying to rebuild something whole. Together they lived in palaces filled with painted floors, music, cats wearing golden earrings, and windows overlooking gardens perfumed with lotus flowers. For a brief moment, life seemed warm and peaceful. But behind the palace walls, challenges remained. The empire weakened during Akhenaten's reign still trembled at its edges. Nubia tested Egypt's defenses. Hittite diplomats sent letters with veiled threats. Vassal states begged for military aid. But Tutankhamun was just a boy, too young to lead armies, too young to negotiate with hardened kings. Much of the responsibility fell to his advisors, who acted in his name while he learned, observed, and matured. And yet, despite the pressures surrounding him, Tutankhamun left a quiet glow on Egypt's memory. He supported artisans, he funded restoration projects, he commissioned statues, chariots, shrines, and golden thrones carved with scenes of love between him and Akhenaten. His reign may have been short, but it was filled with gentle intentions, a return to normalcy after years of chaos. But the gods had written a shorter story for him. Around the age of 18 or 19, Tutankhamun fell ill. Whether from infection, injury, or inherited frailty, no one knows for certain. He grew weak. He struggled to walk. He relied on canes, many of which were later found in his tomb. His final days were quiet, a dimming flame inside a palace that still buzzed with servants, advisors, and anxious prayers. When he died, Egypt mourned him not as a mighty conqueror, but as a symbol of fragile hope, a young king who restored the heartbeat of tradition, a child who carried the weight of gods on thin shoulders. His burial happened quickly, perhaps too quickly. The tomb prepared for him was small, far smaller than any pharaoh's tomb should have been. It was likely built for someone else, repurposed in urgency. But what it lacked in size, it gained in wonder. The priests wrapped him in layers of linen, placed amulets across his chest and limbs, slid him inside nested coffins, one of them pure gold, glowing like the sun, and sealed him behind a door that would remain untouched for more than 3,000 years. The tomb lay silent in the Valley of the Kings. Centuries passed. Dynasties rose and fell. Tombs around him were looted, emptied, stripped. But his remained hidden, protected by an accident of history, buried under debris, unseen by thieves. Egypt forgot his name. His story faded. His dynasty vanished into shadows. But time, in its patience, waited. Then, in 1922, a British archaeologist named Howard Carter entered the valley with fading hope and dwindling funds. At the very last moment, the moment when giving up seemed inevitable, they found a set of steps hidden beneath rubble. Carter brushed away the dust. A door appeared, seals unbroken, torches flickered, and as he peered through the first small opening, he saw gold everywhere. Gold in the lamplight, gold in every corner, gold untouched for millennia. It was Tutankhamun, the forgotten king, the boy who restored the gods, the child who had ruled too briefly to change Egypt forever and yet changed world history through the discovery of his tomb. His burial chamber glowed with treasures, the golden throne, the alabaster lamps, the chariots, the jewelry, the canopic shrine, and of course, the famous golden mask, serene, flawless, eternal. In that moment, Tutankhamun became immortal, not because of what he did in life, but because of what his death preserved. He became a window into the ancient world, a time capsule untouched by time, a perfect echo of Egypt at its most intimate. Today, his name is known everywhere. His mask is an icon. And yet the boy behind the gold remains quiet, soft, distant, a gentle presence across the millennia, a reminder that even the smallest light can shine through the longest darkness. Tutankhamun's reign may have been brief, but his story is infinite, a whisper preserved in gold, a soft footprint in the Valley of Kings, a life that flickered and then glowed forever. And now, as we leave the soft glow of his tomb behind, our journey moves toward the greatest king of the new kingdom, a ruler of unparalleled ambition, a builder of temples, cities, and legends, a man whose reign would define an entire era. His name was Ramses II. When Tutankhamun's golden mask was sealed behind stone and his short reign slipped into silence, Egypt continued forward through years of rebuilding. Horemheb restored order. Ramesses I built structure. Seti I fought to reclaim Egypt's empire. And then, into this world of ambition, war, and renewal, a boy was born who would one day become the most celebrated pharaoh in all of Egyptian memory. A boy with red gold hair, bright eyes, and a spirit that seemed to vibrate with restless energy. His name was Ramses, and he would become Ramses II, Ramses the Great. Ramses was not born into an age of quiet peace. He grew up in military camps, not palace nurseries. He walked among soldiers, charioteers, and captains. He listened to stories of the Hittites, Nubians, Libyans, and Syrian kingdoms. He trained in archery, swordsmanship, and chariot racing from childhood. His father, Seti I, was one of Egypt's finest generals. He taught Ramses discipline. He taught him strategy. He taught him how to read battle lines like reading the flow of the Nile. And he taught him that a king must be both protector and builder, the shield and the foundation of his people. By the time Ramses was crowned pharaoh, he carried both ambition and confidence like a second skin. He was young, perhaps in his early 20s, but he possessed a presence that seemed larger than life. His voice carried command, his posture radiated authority. His dreams reached beyond the horizon. One of his first and greatest tests came early: the rise of the Hittite Empire. Their influence spread across Syria, threatening Egyptian territory. Both great civilizations sought control of Kadesh, a strategic fortress city, and so the stage was set for one of the most famous battles in the ancient world, the Battle of Kadesh. The battle began with deception. Hittite spies disguised as local nomads approached the Egyptian army, telling Ramses that the Hittite king was far away. Ramses trusted their words. He advanced quickly with his vanguard division, leaving other units behind. But it was a trap. The Hittite chariots, swift, deadly, and numbering in the thousands, rushed out from behind the fortress of Kadesh, thundering across the plain. Dust rose like storm clouds. Horses screamed. The ground trembled beneath wheels and hoofs. Ramses found himself nearly alone on the battlefield. His army scattered, his lines broken. But in that moment of chaos, the young king refused to retreat. He grabbed his bow, mounted his chariot, and charged directly into the wave of Hittite forces. Ancient reliefs describe him like Montu, the god of war, raging in battle. He cut through chariots. He fired arrows with unmatched precision. He rallied his troops with shouts that echoed across the valley. By sheer willpower and reinforcements arriving from the rear divisions, Egypt held the line. The battle ended not in victory, but in stalemate, yet Ramses declared it a triumph of heroism. Years later, he carved his version of the battle on temple walls across Egypt, ensuring that every generation would know the courage he displayed that day. But perhaps his greatest achievement came not on the battlefield, but at the negotiating table. After years of tension, Ramses II and the Hittite king Hatshepsut III signed one of the world's first recorded peace treaties, a document inscribed on both clay tablets and Egyptian stone. It promised peace, alliance, and mutual defense. No empire had ever done this before. Ramses had shown the world that diplomacy could stand alongside war in the shaping of nations. With peace secured, Ramses turned his energy toward construction, his true lifelong passion. He built more temples, statues, monuments, and cities than any pharaoh before or after him. He sought not only to rule Egypt, but to immortalize it in stone. One of his greatest creations rose from the cliffs of Nubia, Abu Simbel. Two colossal seated statues of Ramses, each over 20 meters tall, carved directly into the mountainside. Their faces remain serene yet powerful, gazing eternally toward the sunrise. Inside the temple, long halls filled with carved pillars lead to the inner sanctuary, where statues of gods sit in silent majesty. Twice a year, sunlight enters the temple and illuminates the statues. An astronomical alignment engineered with breathtaking precision. Standing before Abu Simbel, you feel very small. You feel the weight of time. You feel Ramses' presence, like a voice carved into the cliff itself. In Thebes, he expanded Karnak, one of the largest temple complexes ever built. He added obelisks, halls, statues, shrines. At Luxor, he built a sprawling courtyard and raised colossal statues of himself. He built Ramesseum, his mortuary temple, a monument to memory, art, and divine kingship. He built Pi-Ramesses in the Delta, a vast new capital filled with palaces, stables, gardens, and administrative offices. Everywhere he went, he left monuments behind. Egypt, under Ramses II, became a land of giants. But his life was not only war and building. Ramses was a family man, perhaps the most prolific in Egyptian history. He lived into his 90s, fathered more than 100 children, and married many queens, including the beloved Nefertari. To her, he dedicated one of the most beautiful temples in Nubia, carved beside his own at Abu Simbel. Inside, the walls are decorated with delicate scenes of her honoring the goddess Hathor. Ramses wrote inscriptions praising her, for whom the sun shines. Her tomb in the Valley of the Queens, richly decorated with stars and brilliant colors, remains one of the most breathtaking in all of Egypt. As Ramses II aged, his reign took on a mythic quality. People spoke of him with reverence. Foreign kings respected him. Allies sought his favor. Enemies feared his armies. Egypt enjoyed unparalleled prosperity. Grain stores overflowed. Trade routes thrived. Temples glowed each dawn with offerings. And the land, blessed by the Nile, felt safe beneath his long and steady rule. 66 years he ruled. A lifetime stretched across almost a century. For many Egyptians, Ramses II was the only pharaoh they ever knew. When he finally passed away, the entire nation mourned as though the sun itself had dimmed. Priests wrapped his body with care, sealed him in coffins fit for a god, and placed him in a tomb in the Valley of the Kings. His mummy, later moved for safety, still exists today, his face showing age, wisdom, and the quiet strength of a king who lived longer than nearly all others. Ramses II left a world transformed. His monuments endure, his treaties endure, his stories endure. His name, Usamatra Setapenra Ramses, echoes through time like a steady heartbeat. To this day, he is the pharaoh most people think of when they imagine ancient Egypt, a symbol of power, majesty, and grandeur. But even during his long rule, distant storms gathered beyond Egypt's borders. New peoples moved across the Mediterranean. City-states collapsed. The Bronze Age, a world of empires, trade routes, and ancient kingdoms edged towards sudden destruction. And soon, Egypt would face one of the greatest threats in its history, a wave of invaders known only as the Sea Peoples. They would shake the foundations of nations. They would burn cities to ashes, and they would bring the new kingdom to its knees. When Ramses II closed his eyes after more than 9 decades of life, Egypt felt as though it had lost a guiding star. For generations, he had been the anchor of the nation, a king whose strength, longevity, and brilliance held chaos at bay. But even the greatest rulers cannot stop the tide of history. As the sun set on Ramses' long reign, the wider world began to tremble. Far beyond Egypt's borders, storms gathered, trade routes faltered, kingdoms collapsed, and waves of displaced people began moving across deserts, islands, and seas. A movement so massive, so sudden, and so destructive that the ancient world would remember it as the great catastrophe, the collapse of the Bronze Age. And among these wandering groups, one force would strike fear into every empire they touched: the Sea Peoples. Their origins remain mysterious even today. Some say they came from islands in the Aegean. Some say they fled from famine or earthquakes. Some say they were warriors driven by hunger and desperation. But whatever the truth, one thing is certain: when the Sea Peoples moved, the world shook. They were not a single tribe, but many. A confederation of displaced cultures, warriors hardened by the collapse of their homelands, families traveling with carts, animals, and children. But at their core were fighters skilled with long swords, round shields, horned helmets, and swift ships. Their movements were unstoppable, a tide that no king could predict. First they struck the Hittite Empire. Cities that had stood for centuries burned in sudden storms of violence. Merchants vanished. Temples fell silent. Granaries emptied. The once mighty Hittites, Egypt's old rivals, crumbled into dust. Other nations followed. Ugarit, a wealthy coastal city, sent desperate letters pleading for help. But by the time reinforcements arrived, its palaces smoldered, its harbor lay in ruins, its people were gone. Across the Mediterranean, towns burned, caravans stopped, ships ran aground or disappeared entirely. The world that had thrived on trade, diplomacy, and shared culture suddenly fractured into silence. And Egypt, though strong, was not untouched by this storm. During the later reigns of Ramses II's successors, warnings began to arrive. Messengers ran across deserts. Envoys from the north knelt before the pharaoh. "The Sea Peoples have come," they said. "They are burning everything." Egypt braced itself. Under Merneptah, Ramses II's son, the first wave appeared. Foreign ships approached the delta, filled with warriors hungry for land, but Egypt was ready. Merneptah's armies clashed with the invaders near the western delta. The battle was fierce, brutal, echoing across the marshlands. But Egypt prevailed. For a moment, the storm paused, but it did not end. Years later, during the reign of Ramses III, the last great king of the new kingdom, the Sea Peoples returned. This time, they came in overwhelming numbers, chariots rolling across land, ships slicing through the waves, families in wagons following behind armies, seeking new homelands. They were determined to settle in Egypt, not merely raid it. They carried with them the memory of fallen cities and the desperation of people with nowhere else to go. Ramses III understood the danger. He prepared Egypt like a fortress. He lined the delta with archers. He stationed chariots along the riverbanks. He positioned ships at the mouths of the Nile. He knew that if the Sea Peoples entered the delta, Egypt would suffer the same fate as the Hittites. Then the invaders arrived. Their ships moved in dense formations, curved hulls cutting across the water. Their warriors filled the decks, shouting, beating shields, raising spears to the sky. Their chariots rolled along the coast, seeking a breach. It was as if the sea itself had risen to swallow Egypt. The battle that followed was unlike any in Egyptian memory. Confusion swirled. Arrows darkened the sky. Egyptian ships closed in, ramming the invaders' vessels. Men fell into the waves, armor dragging them down. Ramses II's archers fired relentlessly from the shore. Chariots raced along the sands, cutting off escape routes. The Sea Peoples fought with wild ferocity, but Egypt's preparation held firm. When the fighting ended, the waters of the delta were littered with broken ships. Bodies floated among shattered masts. The sand was quiet. The storm had been stopped, at least at Egypt's gates. The reliefs at Medinet Habu capture this moment in vivid detail. carved by artisans who witnessed the pharaoh's victory. They show Ramses III, drawn enormous, commanding, divine. They show the sea peoples falling in waves, their helmets horned and feathered, a testament to a battle that saved Egypt from destruction. Egypt had survived, but it had not emerged unscarred. The cost of victory was immense, the economy strained, trade routes closed. Grain shipments dwindled, foreign territories were lost forever. And inside the kingdom, corruption and unrest spread like cracks in ancient stone. The Bronze Age collapse had reshaped the map of the world. Entire civilizations vanished, languages disappeared, writing systems fell silent. And although Egypt did not fall completely, it stumbled. Its empire was gone, its wealth diminished, its borders fragile. The glow of the new kingdom began to dim. After Ramses II's death, weaker kings took the throne. Royal courts fractured under intrigue. Priests of Amun grew powerful, overshadowing pharaohs. Tombs were robbed. Inflation skyrocketed. And slowly, quietly, Egypt slipped into a long decline. The sea peoples had not conquered Egypt, but they had changed it forever. Their arrival marked the beginning of the end of Egypt's golden age, a reminder that even the mightiest empires can tremble under the weight of wider catastrophes, a reminder that no civilization stands apart from the world around it, a reminder that history moves not in lines, but in cycles, shining, fading, rising again. And so, as we close the chapter of the new kingdom, we leave behind the age of great conquerors, great queens, and great builders. We leave behind the thunder of chariots and the glow of temples. We leave behind the brilliance of an empire that touched the stars. Ahead lies a different Egypt, quieter, fragmented, introspective, a land ruled by priests, Libyans, Nubians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans. An Egypt that endures not through conquest, but through memory. The new kingdom ends here with the last echoes of battle fading over the delta, and the pyramids, temples, and golden sands carrying its story softly into the night. When the last echoes of the new kingdom faded, Egypt was no longer the blazing empire that had once shaped the world. The temples still stood, the Nile still flowed, the gods still watched from their stone sanctuaries. But the rhythm of the land had changed. The confidence of the pharaohs had dimmed, and the whispers of decline drifted along the river like mist at dawn. This was the beginning of Egypt's long, slow twilight, a twilight filled not with sudden collapse, but with gentle erosion like stone softening under centuries of wind. After Ramses III, kings came and went with increasing speed. Their reigns were short, their power fragile, their authority questioned not by foreign enemies, but by those within their own borders. And among all the shifting forces of this era, one group rose steadily above the others. The priests of Amun. The god Amun had risen from a local Theban deity to the supreme god of the empire. With every victory of the new kingdom, his temples grew larger, his priests richer, his influence deeper. By the late Ramesside period, the temples of Amun at Karnak and Luxor controlled vast stretches of land across Egypt. They owned fields, cattle, workshops, granaries, ships, and armies of workers. They collected offerings from millions of devotees. They stored gold, silver, precious oils, fine linens, and sacred artifacts in their vault. Their wealth rivaled and eventually surpassed that of the pharaoh. When the central government weakened, the priests filled the vacuum. They controlled the economy. They controlled religion. They controlled the rituals that defined kingship itself. A pharaoh could not be crowned without their blessing. A pharaoh could not communicate with the gods without their mediation. And over time, the priests began acting not only as spiritual leaders, but as political rulers. In Upper Egypt, the high priest of Amun became a king in all but name. He held estates, commanded soldiers, and governed Thebes with authority that matched the throne. In Lower Egypt, the pharaoh still ruled from the delta, but his power rarely reached the deep south. Egypt was effectively split again not by foreign conquerors, but by internal forces. Two centers of authority emerged: the pharaoh in the north, the priesthood in the south. This division eroded unity. Local governors asserted independence, temple estates grew unchecked, corruption seeped into bureaucracy, tombs were robbed, taxes went unpaid. The people grew weary, uncertain, and disillusioned. The glorious days of Ramses II felt distant, like a memory half forgotten in the sand. And while Egypt divided itself within, enemies outside its borders watched, waiting for the moment to strike. To the south lay Nubia, a land Egypt once ruled during its imperial heights. But now the balance of power had shifted. Nubia grew stronger as Egypt weakened. Its kings watched the fragmentation with keen eyes, and once they sensed the softness of Egypt's borders, they moved northward, reclaiming lands once taken from them centuries earlier. To the west, Libyan tribes drifted closer and closer to the delta. At first, they arrived peacefully: shepherds, traders, migrants. Egypt allowed them to settle, believing they posed no threat. But as years passed, their numbers grew, their leaders gained influence. And eventually, Libyan chiefs married into Egyptian families, commanding troops and wielding authority from within. In time, a Libyan dynasty rose to the throne. These kings maintained Egyptian traditions, built temples, and honored the gods. But their rule marked a profound shift. Egypt was now led by foreigners who had adopted the culture rather than inherited it. This would happen again and again in the centuries to come. Then, from the distant east, the Assyrians turned their gaze toward Egypt. The Assyrian Empire was fierce, militaristic, relentless. Its armies were brutal machines of conquest, and when they marched westward, few kingdoms could withstand their force. Egypt resisted at first, but the division between north and south weakened its stand. Assyrian armies swept through the delta. City after city fell. Kings were captured, temples pillaged. Thebes, the heart of Amun, the jewel of Upper Egypt, was sacked. Statues were smashed, sacred treasures stolen. The city's great libraries and workshops lay devastated. The shock of Thebes' fall echoed across the ancient world. It was not just a military defeat. It was a symbolic death, the end of an era when Egypt's spiritual center had stood untouched for nearly 2,000 years. The Assyrian yoke was heavy but short-lived. Their empire, stretched thin by constant war, soon weakened. And as Assyria fell, new powers rose. Among them was a familiar neighbor, Nubia. The kings of Kush, ruling from their southern capital at Napata, saw Egypt vulnerable and divided. But they did not come as conquerors seeking plunder. They came as restorers, believers in Egyptian culture, guardians of Amun. They marched north not to destroy, but to revive. And under the Kushite kings, especially Pa and Taharqa, Egypt experienced a brief, shining revival. Art flourished again, temples reopened, priests chanted once more in the halls of Karnak. For a moment, it seemed as though the old rhythms had returned. But the world was changing too quickly. New powers were rising beyond Egypt's borders, and one of them, vast, organized, and relentless, would soon sweep across the Near East like a tide of iron. That power was Persia. The Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great expanded with almost miraculous speed. Under his successors, it grew into the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. From the Indus Valley to the Mediterranean, from the highlands of Anatolia to the deserts of Arabia. And Egypt, weakened and fractured, could not stand alone against it. Cambyses II, son of Cyrus, launched a massive campaign into Egypt. Egyptian forces fought bravely, but the Persians were organized, disciplined, and technologically advanced. Pelusium, the gateway to the delta, fell, and with it, Egypt became a Persian province. Cambyses crowned himself pharaoh. Persian governors took control of temples, taxes, and administration. Egypt, for the first time, became part of a vast imperial machine. Persian rule was strict, at times harsh, but it brought stability, repaired infrastructure, and reorganized bureaucracy. Yet beneath the surface, the Egyptians longed for independence. A brief period of rebellion restored Egyptian independence under native kings. They built walls, forged alliances, rearmed the kingdom. But their freedom was fragile. Persia watched, Persia waited, and Persia returned. Artaxerxes III launched the second conquest. The siege of Pelusium was brutal. Cities were captured, and Egypt was absorbed once more into the Persian Empire. The priests of Amun bowed their heads under foreign rule again. Temples paid tribute. Governors enforced Persian law. The Nile flowed, but the spirit of the nation felt dim. Again, rebellion flickered. Again, Egypt broke free, but not for long. A final attempt at independence arose under Nectanebo II, the last native Egyptian pharaoh. He was wise, resourceful, and determined. His reign saw a final burst of artistic beauty: temples carved with elegance, inscriptions filled with dignity, statues shaped with the memory of ancient splendor. But Persia returned with overwhelming force. Nectanebo II fled south. Egypt fell once more. This time, the fall felt permanent. This time, the land seemed to sigh with resignation. The age of pharaohs, native pharaohs, had ended, and yet, even Persia could not hold forever. Empires rose, empires fell. Time washed over kingdoms like waves over sand. And from the west came a different kind of conqueror, young, brilliant, and unstoppable. His footsteps shook the world, his shadow stretched across continents, and when he reached Egypt, the people did not resist. They welcomed him like a liberator. His name was Alexander, Alexander the Great. But that is a story waiting in the horizon of the next chapter. A moment when Egypt, tired and battered, steps into a new world under Greek and Roman rule, a world where ancient temples still whispered, but new voices echoed beside them, a world where dynasties changed, but the Nile flowed on steady, eternal, patient. And as this long twilight of native Egypt draws to its close, we feel the soft ache of endings, the quiet dignity of survival, and the gentle truth that even in decline, Egypt remained beautiful. Not a fallen kingdom, but a dream carried across centuries, waiting for the next sunrise. When the long shadow of Persia fell across Egypt for the third time, the land of the Nile was tired, fractured, and quietly longing for deliverance. Temples still echoed with ancient prayers, but the voices were weaker. Priests still poured incense, but their hands trembled. The Nile still flowed, faithful and eternal. But Egypt's spirit felt worn thin. And then, from the distant mountains of Macedonia, a young king began a journey that would change the world. A king only 20 years old. A king whose name would echo through centuries like a whisper carried by the wind. Alexander. By the time he turned his gaze toward Egypt, Alexander had already shaken the foundations of the Near East. He had defeated Persia in battle after battle. He had taken cities that once seemed untouchable. He had forged an empire in mere years. When he crossed the Sinai and approached Pelusium, the Egyptians watched with a mixture of fear and hope. But Alexander did not come as a conqueror. He came as a liberator. He came as a restorer. He came as someone who understood the value of respect. The Persians who ruled Egypt were harsh and often indifferent. Their governors taxed heavily. Their soldiers enforced foreign laws. The people longed for a ruler who would honor their gods, their traditions, their land. So when Alexander entered Egypt, the gates opened to him without resistance. Crowds welcomed him with songs, flowers, and offerings. Priests bowed. Children cheered. It was as if Egypt itself exhaled after holding its breath for decades. Alexander walked through Memphis with quiet reverence. He visited the temples. He offered sacrifices to Apis, the sacred bull. He accepted the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt not with arrogance, but with solemn grace. To the Egyptians, this moment felt like destiny. A foreign king, yes, but a king who understood the weight of their ancient rituals. A king who listened, a king who cared. For the first time in generations, they believed the gods had sent them someone worthy. But the defining moment of his relationship with Egypt came when Alexander traveled into the western desert to seek the oracle of Siwa. The journey was long and silent. Wind brushed over endless dunes. Shadows shifted like old spirits dancing beneath the sun. Alexander walked with his army, but his thoughts wandered alone. He sought answers not for conquest, but for identity, for purpose, for the meaning of the voice that seemed to guide him from victory to victory. When he reached the oasis at Siwa, priests welcomed him into the sacred sanctuary of Amun. What happened inside remains one of history's most beautiful mysteries. Some say the oracle called him son of the god. Some say he asked a question no one else heard. Some say he left the temple, changed his eyes calmer, his posture firmer, his destiny clearer. Whatever truth lies beneath the legend, Alexander walked out of Siwa believing he was chosen, not just to rule, but to create. And so he decided to build a city, not simply a settlement, not a fortress, but a beacon, a place where Greek ideas and Egyptian wisdom could stand side by side. A city of light, a city of learning, a city that would outlive him. He found his place on the Mediterranean coast, where the sea met the sky in wide blue arcs. He paced the shore barefoot. He let the wind move through his hair. He traced the outline of the city with barley grains poured from his hand. The gods answered when birds swooped down and carried the grains across the sand, as if blessing the land he had chosen. He named the city Alexandria. Alexandria rose quickly. Architects drew grids and avenues with perfect clarity. Engineers carved deep harbors for fleets. Merchants arrived with ships heavy with spices, oils, wines, scrolls, and stories. Artists painted frescoes of gods from both cultures. The city grew like a dream, unfolding wide streets, brilliant white walls, gardens filled with lotus and laurel. And one day, a lighthouse would rise there too, the Pharaohs, its fire guiding ships across the night like a star held in stone. But Alexandria's greatest treasure was not its walls or its harbor. It was the vision it embodied. A city where worlds blended. A city that would become home to scholars, poets, mathematicians, and philosophers. A city that would host the greatest library on earth. Though the library would come later, its spirit was born the moment Alexander traced the city in sand. Alexander stayed in Egypt only a short time. His ambitions stretched far beyond the Nile. He marched east again, chasing the dream of a universal empire. He defeated the Persians once and for all. He marched into Babylon, into the mountains of Persia, into Afghanistan, into India. His empire became vast, shimmering, impossible, the kind of empire built only by someone who believed he could reshape the world. And then, suddenly, at the age of 32, Alexander died. A candle blown out in the middle of its brightest flame. His empire fractured. His generals divided the world he had carved. And Egypt fell into the hands of Ptolemy, a general wise enough to understand the importance of symbolism. Ptolemy escorted Alexander's body back to Egypt. He built a tomb for him in Alexandria, making the city both a capital and a shrine. And with that act, he anchored the future of Egypt to the legacy of its Greek liberator. Thus began the Ptolemaic dynasty, a dynasty of Greek kings and queens ruling an Egyptian land, a dynasty where marble columns stood beside lotus-carved temples, a dynasty where the Library of Alexandria became the mind of the ancient world, a dynasty where two cultures intertwined like twin serpents, and a dynasty that would end with the fall of Cleopatra, the last star of a civilization 3,000 years old. But before we reach her story, we step into the world shaped by her ancestors, a world half Greek, half Egyptian, brilliant and fragile, glowing like a flame caught between two winds. When Ptolemy took Egypt after Alexander's death, he did not try to erase the past or rewrite the land to mirror Greece. He understood Egypt's ancient soul, calm, deep, and older than any empire Alexander had conquered. He understood that Egypt was not a place to dominate, but a place to harmonize with. And so the age of the Ptolemies began, not with destruction, but with blending, a merging of two worlds. A kingdom where Greek ambition and Egyptian tradition wove themselves into a new identity that belonged to both, and to neither entirely. A world half marble, half sandstone, half laurel, half lotus, half philosophy, half myth. Ptolemy made Alexandria his capital. He saw in it not only Alexander's dream, but a chance to create a city that could eclipse all others. A city that would breathe knowledge, trade, art, and power. A city that would shine brighter than Athens, stronger than Memphis, and more cosmopolitan than Babylon. Alexandria rose quickly, a geometric masterpiece drawn onto the coastline. Wide avenues cut through the city like threads of silver. Marble colonnades gleamed beneath bright Mediterranean light. Gardens overflowed with palms, figs, pomegranates, papyrus, and flowers carried from distant lands. The air smelled of salt, ink, honey, and incense. Ships came from every corner of the known world. Egyptian barges, Greek triremes, Phoenician merchant ships, Arabian dios heavy with spices, Indian vessels carrying cinnamon, pearls, and strange treasures no one had seen before. At night, the great lighthouse, the Pharaohs, lit the sea like a celestial torch. Its flame flickered across the water, guiding sailors home, promising safety after the long uncertainty of waves. The lighthouse was one of the 7 wonders of the world, not only because of its size, but because of the quiet poetry of its presence. It was a symbol of humanity reaching upward, lighting darkness, defying distance. But Alexandria's greatest wonder was something far more delicate than marble or fire. It was knowledge. Knowledge carried in scrolls, in ink, in the breath of scholars wandering through quiet halls. It was the Library of Alexandria. No one knows exactly what the library looked like, but everyone knows what it meant. It was the beating heart of the ancient intellectual world, a sanctuary of learning, a cathedral of ideas, a place where scholars dreamed not of wealth or power, but of understanding the universe. They came from every land, drawn as if by a magnetic force. Egyptians, Greeks, Syrians, Persians, Jews, Babylonians, Phoenicians, Africans, Indians. Philosophers debated beneath shaded courtyards. Mathematicians filled wax tablets with equations. Doctors dissected animals to understand anatomy. Linguists translated sacred texts into Greek. Astronomers mapped constellations. Poets wrote verses meant to echo through eternity. It was here that Euclid refined the foundations of geometry, here that Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the earth with astonishing accuracy, using only shadows and intellect. Here that scholars compiled histories, created atlases, and studied the patterns of stars, storms, and human thought. Here that papyrus scrolls filled entire chambers, thousands upon thousands stacked in niches that smelled of ink and time. The library did not merely store knowledge, it created it, it celebrated it, it protected it. For centuries, Alexander's dream became a living mind, breathing through the scholars who gathered within its walls. But while Alexandria flourished as a Greek-Egyptian masterpiece, the land's spiritual life began to blend as well. The gods themselves reshaped to reflect the dual cultures. Amun, the great Egyptian god of creation, merged with Zeus, the supreme Greek god of the sky. Together they formed Amun-Zeus, a deity that embodied both thunder and hidden breath, both the Greek heavens and the Egyptian unseen. Artists carved him with Greek musculature and Egyptian crowns. Priests whispered his names in Greek and Egyptian. Temples honored him as a bridge between two worlds. And then came Serapis, the most profound symbol of cultural fusion. Serapis was a created god, yet he felt ancient. He was designed to unify Greek and Egyptian devotion. His body was Greek, strong and idealized. His soul was Egyptian, ruler of the afterlife and the cycles of rebirth. He governed healing, fertility, fortune, the dead, and the living. Serapis belonged to everyone. He was the heart of a blended identity, half Thebes, half Athens, entirely new. People prayed to him beneath colonnades scented with incense and lotus oil. His temples became places of singing, study, and serenity. Even those skeptical at first eventually embraced him, because he felt gentle, inviting, universal. The Ptolemaic kings supported this religious blending. They wanted unity, or at least the illusion of unity. But beneath the calm surface, tensions simmered. The Greeks, ruling elite of Alexandria, saw themselves as heirs of Alexander. The Egyptians, rooted in traditions older than any empire, sometimes resented foreign rulers sitting on the throne of the pharaohs. Within the royal family, rivalries became dangerous. Brothers plotted against brothers. Sisters poisoned sisters. Mothers and sons fought for power. The Ptolemaic court became a palace of marble and whispers, beautiful on the outside, fractured within. And yet, despite the bloodshed and ambition, Egypt under the Ptolemies remained luminous. Trade boomed. The arts flourished. Temples were maintained. The library expanded. Cities grew. Egypt remained one of the richest lands in the Mediterranean. But history has a rhythm, and the rhythm of this era was one of brilliance followed by instability. For as the generations passed, the Ptolemaic dynasty weakened. Kings became young or incompetent. Queens were ambitious but isolated. Rome watched from across the sea, patient, calculating, waiting. Egypt was no longer the conqueror. It was the prize. And in the middle of this swirling, fragile world, a young girl was born, a princess of the Ptolemaic bloodline, a polyglot, a scholar, a future queen. She would become the last pharaoh of Egypt, and the final chapter of a 3,000-year civilization would rest upon her shoulders. Her name was Cleopatra. Cleopatra VII was born into a world already trembling at the edges, a world of silk and marble, but also of whispers, daggers, and fragile alliances. She entered life in the royal palace of Alexandria, a place where Greek intellect and Egyptian majesty met in sunlit courtyards and echoing halls. The city hummed with poets, scholars, merchants, priests, sailors, and spies. And in the center of that whirlwind was a small princess learning to survive long before she learned to rule. From childhood, Cleopatra was different from her siblings. While others relied on beauty or ambition, she relied on mind. She listened more than she spoke. She watched more than she acted. By the age of 14, she could converse in Greek, Egyptian, Aramaic, Latin, and several African tongues. She studied mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, and medicine. She knew the politics of the palace, the weight of the crown, the fragility of power. Those around her sensed she was born for something immense or devastating. When she was 17, the crown arrived sooner than expected. Her father died. leaving Cleopatra to rule alongside her younger brother Ptolemy XIII. But he was only a child, and the advisors surrounding him were hungry for control. In Alexandria, loyalty was fluid like the sea. Alliances shifted overnight, smiles hid threats, and Cleopatra found herself pushed aside, stripped of authority, forced into exile from her own palace. She fled Egypt with only a handful of loyal followers, her future dissolving like dust on the desert wind. But destiny had not abandoned her. Across the Mediterranean, Rome was in turmoil, and at its center was Julius Caesar, a brilliant, ambitious general whose decisions reshaped continents. He arrived in Alexandria to resolve disputes and pursue his enemy Pompey. Cleopatra saw her chance. She needed Caesar's support, not for luxury or vengeance, but to reclaim her throne and save her kingdom. Legend tells us she had herself smuggled into Caesar's chambers wrapped inside a carpet or linen sack. When the fabric unfurled, she stepped out like a soft flame, not seductive, not desperate, but poised, intelligent, radiant with confidence. Caesar saw not only beauty, but brilliance. Not only charm, but courage. Their alliance formed like a spark touching dry wood. Together, they restored order. Together, they defeated her brother. Together, they placed Cleopatra on the throne as the rightful queen of Egypt. Cleopatra and Caesar soon became lovers. In their union, there was both affection and strategy. She offered him insight into Egypt's wealth, knowledge, and ancient magic. He offered her protection, legitimacy, and power. Their son, Caesarion, was born a year later, a child carrying the blood of Rome and the soul of Egypt. For a moment, the world seemed to glow. Cleopatra sailed with Caesar along the Nile. She showed him temples older than Rome itself. She spoke of the gods, of the stars, of the desert's timeless silence. He saw in her not a queen of a fading kingdom, but a ruler worthy of an empire, and she saw in him the possibility of a restored Egypt rising beside Rome's power. But Rome was not a place that forgave ambition lightly. When Caesar returned, resentment grew. Senators whispered. Allies hardened their hearts. And on the Ides of March, Caesar fell beneath a storm of knives. His blood stained the marble floor. His death reshaped the world. Cleopatra's hopes shattered like a dropped vessel. Rome plunged once again into civil war. And Cleopatra, aware of the shifting winds, sought alliance with one of the new rising powers, Mark Antony. Antony summoned her to meet him in Tarsus. What she prepared for him was not an audience, but a vision. She sailed up the river on a golden barge, its purple sails catching the sun. Servants scattered rose petals. Musicians played flutes so soft they seemed made of air. Cleopatra reclined beneath a canopy of stars embroidered in gold thread. The scent of incense drifted across the water. The people whispered, "Aphrodite comes to meet Dionysus." Antony was captivated, not only by her appearance, but by her intelligence, wit, and unmistakable presence. Their union was immediate, passionate, strategic, and unstoppable. She found in Antony a man of immense loyalty and chaotic brilliance. He found in her a queen of staggering charisma and depth. Together they ruled the Eastern Mediterranean in a partnership of love and power. But their alliance terrified Octavian, heir to Caesar and future Augustus of Rome. He feared Cleopatra's influence, feared Egypt's wealth, feared Antony's devotion to her. He launched a campaign of propaganda portraying Cleopatra as a sorceress, seducing Antony into betraying Rome. The Senate listened, Rome listened, and soon, war was declared not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. The final confrontation unfolded at Actium, a naval battle beneath a merciless sun. Cleopatra's fleet and Antony's forces faced Octavian's disciplined navy. Winds turned treacherous, ships burned, screams echoed across the waves. In the chaos, Cleopatra saw disaster coming and turned her flagship south. Antony, torn between command and love, followed her. Their fleet collapsed behind them like a dying storm. They fled to Alexandria, a city still beautiful, but now haunted by approaching defeat. Antony spiraled into despair. Cleopatra remained composed, but grief shadowed her eyes. They prepared for Rome's invasion with dwindling hope. When Octavian's forces finally surrounded Alexandria, Antony fought one last time. He lost. Broken, believing Cleopatra dead, he fell upon his own sword. But he did not die immediately. Servants carried him to Cleopatra's hidden chamber. He died in her arms, his blood on her hands, his final breath a whisper of regret and love. Cleopatra, left alone, faced the cold reality of Octavian's victory. She knew what awaited her. She knew Rome would parade her through its streets as a trophy, a humiliation worse than death. She refused to be the symbol of Egypt's submission. She refused to let the legacy of her ancestors end in chains. In her final hours, Cleopatra prepared herself with calm dignity. She dressed in royal robes. She adorned herself with jewels. She sat upon a golden couch in a quiet room scented with myrrh. And with the help of her loyal attendants, she embraced death. Whether by asp bite or poisoned ointment, no one knows for certain, but she died with the poise of a queen until the last heartbeat. When Octavian entered her chamber, he found her lying motionless, serene, crowned even in death. With Cleopatra's passing, Egypt, the Egypt of pharaohs, pyramids, divine kingship, and 3,000 years of wonder came to an end. The land became a province of Rome. Its temples fell silent. The library of Alexandria slowly faded. The last light of the ancient world dimmed beneath a new empire rising. But Cleopatra's memory did not vanish. She remained a symbol of intelligence, of beauty, of ambition, of tragedy, of unbroken spirit. A star that fell, but left a long glowing trail across the sky of history. A reminder that even in its final breath, Egypt was magnificent. And so the story of ancient Egypt, from Ra rising from the lotus, to the pyramids, to the golden age of the new kingdom, to the twilight of Cleopatra, settles into silence like desert wind over old stone, not ending, but resting, waiting for dreamers to remember. When night fell over ancient Egypt and the last glow of the sun slipped beneath the desert horizon, the people believed the world entered a realm of spirits, a realm hidden beneath the earth, beneath memory, beneath breath, a realm called the Duat. To the Egyptians, life and death were not opposite paths. They were two chambers of the same sacred house, two halves of the same eternal breath. They believed every human carried a soul woven from divine threads, and when the body died, the soul began a journey long, mysterious, beautiful, and perilous through the unseen world. Tonight, we follow that journey, slowly, gently, as if drifting along a dark river under a blanket of silent stars. The journey through the Duat. The Duat was not hell, it was not heaven. It was a landscape of testing, transformation, memory, and truth. A place where the soul shed its earthly weight and prepared for eternity. The Egyptians described the Duat as a vast underworld with rivers, mountains, caverns, lakes of fire, fields of reeds, stars, spirits, guardians, and serpents. It was both beautiful and terrifying, both familiar and alien, both shadow and light. The soul began its journey at the moment of death. As the final breath left the body, the soul's personality, its freedom, its wings rose like a bird into the air. It hovered above its own body, watching priests purify the flesh with oils and incense. It watched loved ones cry. It watched the first rituals begin. And then, drawn by the pull of the unseen world, it drifted toward the entrance of the Duat. The Duat had 12 gates, each one representing an hour of the night. Each gate guarded by fearsome deities, whose eyes glowed like embers. Each gate demanding knowledge, names, words of power, spells learned in life. The soul carried these words within its heart, written not on papyrus, but on memory itself. At the first gate, darkness deepened. A guardian asked for the secret name of the threshold. Only if the soul spoke correctly would the gate open. Behind it lay rivers as black as obsidian, forests of silence, creatures made of fire and smoke. But the soul did not walk alone. For every night, Ra, the sun god, traveled through the Duat in his solar barque, his divine boat. In life, Ra sailed across the sky. In death, and through each night, he sailed the underworld. The souls of the dead joined him as passengers, companions, and witnesses. Together they drifted along the dark river, guided by stars that glowed beneath the earth. But deep in the shadows waited Apep, the great serpent of chaos. Apep was enormous, a coil of darkness, a mouth wide enough to swallow the sun. Every night he tried. Every night he rose from the depths of the Duat, lunging toward Ra's barque. Every night the gods battled him, set with his spear, Mehen the coiled guardian, the crew of divine protectors chanting spells older than language. The fate of the world hung upon this confrontation. If Apep swallowed the sun, morning would never come. Order would shatter. The world would drown in endless night. But each night, Ra triumphed. Apep fell back into the abyss. The barque continued. The soul continued. And the Duat opened its next gate. The journey through the 12 hours was slow, dreamlike, and symbolic. The soul passed pools of fire where wicked spirits burned. It passed fields where the dead harvested crops of light. It passed caverns where stars were born. It passed islands where guardians slept with scorpion tails and lion faces. It passed shrines where mists curled upward like incense. Through each realm, the soul learned something new: patience, humility, courage, truth. It was not punishment. It was purification, a stripping away of falsehood, a remembering of one's true nature. Finally, after traveling through the last gate, the soul arrived at the most important chamber of all, the Hall of Ma'at, the weighing of the heart, the Hall of Ma'at. The Hall of Ma'at was vast, larger than any temple on earth. Columns rose like mountains, carved from starlight. Torches glowed with pale blue flames. The floor shimmered like polished moonstone. At the far end of the hall sat Osiris, god of death, resurrection, and eternal justice. Green-skinned, silent, wrapped in linen like a king who had conquered death itself. Beside him stood Isis and Nephthys, wings folded like gentle shadows, and before them stood a scale delicate, perfect, terrifying. This was the scale on which the fate of every soul was decided. Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification and protection, guided the soul forward. His presence was calm, steady, comforting. He placed the soul's heart on one side of the scale, not the physical heart, but the spiritual heart, the seat of memory, emotion, intention, truth. For the Egyptians believed that the heart carried every action, every word, every thought of a lifetime. On the other side of the scale rested a single feather, the feather of Ma'at. Ma'at was truth, balance, harmony, cosmic justice, the principle that held the universe together. If the heart was as light as the feather, the soul was pure. If the heart was heavy with wrongdoing, it would sink. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, stood beside the scale with a scroll and a reed pen. He recorded everything, not to judge, but to witness. The hall fell into deep silence. The soul waited. The scale trembled. If the heart balanced the feather, Osiris nodded, his quiet blessing filling the hall like warm wind. The soul had passed. It was free to enter eternity. But if the heart was heavy, too heavy, there would be no second chances, no negotiation, no forgiveness. Heavy hearts were devoured by Ammit. The terrifying creature crouched beside the scale, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, the three most dangerous animals in Egypt. To be devoured by Ammit meant annihilation, not torture, not pain, simply nothingness, a soul unmade. The stakes were absolute, and yet the Egyptians lived with hope, for their rituals, their morality, their prayers, their offerings, all prepared them for this moment. They believed most hearts would balance, that truth would triumph, that eternity awaited, and once the soul passed the judgment of the scales, it transformed. Ka, Ba, and Ach, the threefold soul. The Egyptians believed each person was made of multiple spiritual parts. The most important were the Ka, the Ba, and the Ach. The Ka was the life force, the energy, the vitality, the divine spark given at birth. It stayed close to the body after death. It needed food, water, incense, prayer. Offerings fed the Ka. Without offerings, the Ka weakened. The Ba was the personality, the memories, laughter, voice, emotions. Often depicted as a human-headed bird, the Ba could fly freely. It moved between the Duat and the living world. It visited family. It wandered the earth. It watched the sunrise. The Ach was the perfected soul, the luminous, eternal form achieved after judgment. When the Ka and Ba united again after the weighing of the heart, the Ach was born, radiant, free, immortal, able to dwell among the gods or in paradise. This belief was not abstract. It shaped every ritual, every prayer, every tomb, every carving. It was why the Egyptians built monuments that touched the sky, why they wrote spells on papyrus, why they painted scenes of daily life inside tombs, why they filled burial chambers with food, tools, jewelry, toys, and dreams, to nourish the Ka, to comfort the Ba, to prepare the Ach, and to ensure the soul survived. One more thing was necessary: the body. Why the Egyptians needed the mummy. To the Egyptians, the body was not a shell to discard. It was an anchor, a home, a vessel for the Ka and Ba. Without the body preserved, protected, honored, the soul could not complete its journey. And so they created the art of mummification. The process was delicate, sacred, and filled with prayer. It took 70 days. Priests purified the body with palm wine and sacred oils. They removed organs carefully, storing them in canopic jars protected by deities. They dried the body with natron salt until flesh and time found balance. They anointed the skin with cedar oil, myrrh, lotus, honey, and resin scents meant to carry memories of the living world. They wrapped the body in linen, layer after layer. Some mummies were wrapped in hundreds of meters of cloth. Between the layers they placed amulets, hearts, scarabs, ankhs, eyes of Horus. Each amulet carried a spell of protection. Each fold of linen was a whisper of hope. The final layer was often adorned with a golden mask. Not vanity, not decoration, but recognition. The mask helped the soul identify its body in the Duat. Without it, the Ba might wander lost. When the mummy was complete, the priests performed the opening of the mouth ceremony. They touched the mummy's lips with sacred tools. They recited ancient words. And symbolically, they restored breath, the ability to eat, speak, and sense in the afterlife. Only then was the body ready, ready to rest, ready to wait, ready to be reunited with its soul at the end of the Duat's long journey. The field of reeds. The Egyptian heaven beyond the hall of Maat, beyond judgment, beyond transformation, lay Egypt's vision of paradise, the field of reeds. The Egyptians called it Aru, the perfect place, the mirror of earth, but without suffering, without hunger, without fear. The field of reeds was a vast landscape of shimmering waters and endless fields. Lotus blossoms floated on quiet lakes. Birds sang in warm breezes. Papyrus swayed like green feathers brushing against the sky. The air smelled of honey, sunlight, fresh grain, and the first breath of dawn. Here, souls lived the life they loved, perfected, unending, serene. Farmers tended fields that always yielded harvests. Scribes wrote poetry without error. Mothers held children who never aged. Lovers walked hand in hand through golden meadows. Families gathered beneath shade trees by clear pools. There was no war, no death, no illness, no loneliness. Only balance, only harmony, only joy. In the field of reeds, every sunrise was gentle, every sunset was sweet, and in the far distance, Ra rose once more reborn after defeating Apep, completing the eternal cycle. The Akh, radiant and whole, could visit gods, join festivals, sail with Ra in the solar barque, or wander through paradise at will. Time held no meaning there. Seasons flowed softly. Souls laughed with voices like warm river water. For the Egyptians, heaven was not a distant, abstract realm. It was a perfected version of home. The Nile eternal, the harvest eternal, the family eternal, life eternal. And so the Egyptians lived with comfort, with courage, with serenity. Not because death was easy, but because death was understood. Death was a doorway, a journey, a return. The sun set each day, but always rose again. So too did the soul. 3,000 years is a long time for a story. Long enough for rivers to change their paths. Long enough for empires to rise and fall. Long enough for the stars themselves to drift across the sky in slow, silent arcs. But Egypt held its story close, held it like a flame cupped between gentle hands, held it through ages of sunlight, stone, ritual, music, war, peace, and endless Nile summers. Tonight, after this long journey, we come to the final chapter of that ancient flame, softly, slowly. Like the last breath of evening as it kisses the horizon, it began with water and darkness, with the swirling primordial ocean called Nun, with a small mound of earth rising from the chaos, the first piece of land, a lotus opening, a god awakening, a sun lifting its face for the first time. From that single moment of emergence came the great rhythm of Egypt: creation, order, life, death, renewal. A cycle repeated in every sunrise and every tomb. A memory engraved in sand and eternity. From that first mound grew villages along the Nile, then kingdoms, then one unified land under Narmer, a king wearing both crowns, red and white, a symbol of a world brought into harmony. Egypt, the two lands, became one nation, one heartbeat stretching from delta reeds to Nubian cliffs, and that heartbeat echoed for centuries. Time moved on, and stone rose toward the heavens. The old kingdom breathed giants into existence, pyramids so vast they still defy comprehension. Blocks weighing tons lifted by human hands and human faith. Kings sleeping in chambers aligned to stars. Imhotep's genius shaping eternity. Khufu's pyramid catching morning light like a mountain of gold. The desert shimmering around them, silent but alive. Then came collapse, drought, fragmentation. But Egypt learned to rise again. Mentuhotep II brought the two lands back together. Trade revived, temples flourished. The Middle Kingdom sang poems of longing, wisdom, and the delicate fragility of life. It was a gentler age, introspective, philosophical, full of stories written for the soul. And then, the new kingdom rose in a blaze of gold. Thutmose drove out the Hyksos and forged an empire. Hatshepsut built temples that looked like dreams carved into cliffs. Thutmose III marched across continents, sharp as lightning. Akhenaten rewrote heaven in the language of sunlight. Tutankhamun restored ancient prayers. Ramses II raised monuments whose shadows stretch across ages. Egypt became a world of power, artistry, ambition, and divine kingship. A place where gods walked beside people in statues, rituals, and whispers. But even the brightest flame dims. Foreigners came, Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, Persians, each one leaving a trace, a bruise, a lesson. And finally, Alexander arrived not as a destroyer, but as a liberator. He gave Egypt a new crown, a new city, a new voice in the Mediterranean winds. The Ptolemies blended Greece and Egypt into something unique. Alexandria glowed with scholarship and wonder. The library became the mind of the ancient world. Serapis, Amun, Zeus, and new gods shaped a blended spiritual landscape. And then Cleopatra, brilliant, fearless, tragic, held the crown as the last guardian of Egypt's ancient soul. Her fall closed the final page of the Pharaohs. Rome took the throne, and the lights of 3,000 years softened into twilight. But Egypt did not die. Civilizations never truly die. They simply change shape. They rest. They dream. They wait. Every grain of desert sand still remembers the footsteps of ancient priests. Every ripple of the Nile still carries the reflections of forgotten temples. Every star above the pyramids still shines, as it did for the builders who looked up and whispered prayers into the night. Egypt's spirit remains woven into the world, into time, into memory. It is a civilization that outlasted kingdoms, empires, storms, and centuries of silence. And now, as we stand at the end of this long journey through history, myth, and the afterlife, we slow our breath. The story becomes softer, the light becomes dimmer. The ancient world settles like dust, drifting gently back to the earth. 3,000 years of kings and queens. 3,000 years of temples and pyramids. 3,000 years of prayers carried on incense smoke. 3,000 years of art carved into stone and soul. 3,000 years of belief in order, in truth, in cycles, in eternity. All of it stretching like a golden thread across the vast tapestry of human time. And now that thread comes to rest. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let your breath grow slow. Let the world around you fade into quiet. Because Egypt, with all its stories, is not gone. It is only sleeping, wrapped in desert winds, wrapped in starlight, wrapped in the hush of temples long abandoned yet never forgotten. As you close your eyes, imagine standing on the bank of the Nile at dusk, water shimmering like melted moonlight, date palms swaying softly, a faraway song drifting across the river, the pyramids glowing faintly under the first stars, and somewhere in the darkness, the whisper of an ancient voice calling your name through time. You are not leaving Egypt, you are simply letting it rest, letting it return to silence, just as the ancients did at the end of each day. Their world, like yours, moved in gentle cycles, waking and sleeping, rising and fading, beginning and ending. And endings are not endings, they are invitations, doors half opened, journeys paused, not finished. Because the pharaohs are still there, their spirits wandering the sands, their temples waiting beneath sunlight, their stories carved into stone, patient as ever. Because the pyramids are still there, standing against wind, time, and the memory of forgotten gods. Because the Nile is still there, flowing with the same rhythm it carried since the dawn of creation. And all of them, pharaohs, pyramids, the Nile, are waiting for you, waiting for another night, another quiet moment, another dream. So close your eyes. Breathe softly. Let the desert settle around you like a warm blanket. Let the last echoes of ancient Egypt drift into silence. And remember, Whenever you wish to return, whenever your heart feels the pull of forgotten sands, Egypt will be here, timeless, patient, eternal, waiting for you to come back on another gentle night.